Single dad lost his job for stopping to help an old lady. She was the president's mother. He thought he was just changing a tire in the rain, but when the truth hit the news, that small act of kindness turned his entire life and the whole nation upside down. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The early morning light crept through the worn curtains of the Turner home, casting long shadows across the small kitchen. Michael Turner's weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency as he packed his lunch into a brown paper bag. The same lunch he'd made countless times before, a simple sandwich, an apple, and a granola bar that Emma had insisted he add to his routine. "You need the energy, Dad," she always said. He glanced at the clock on the wall, 5:45 a.m. The familiar weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders as he smoothed out his company uniform shirt with an old iron. The hiss of steam filled the quiet morning air. "Dad?" Emma's soft voice came from the hallway. She stood there in her pajamas, her dark hair tousled from sleep. "You're up early again." Michael managed a warm smile, though exhaustion tugged at the corners of his eyes. "Big delivery today, sweetheart. Can't be late for this one." He placed 2 pieces of bread in the toaster. "You should be sleeping." "Couldn't sleep." Emma moved to the kitchen table, her eyes falling on the stack of unopened envelopes. College acceptance letters, 5 of them. They'd been sitting there for 3 days, untouched. Each one represented both a dream and a burden. Michael watched his daughter trace her finger along the edge of one envelope. His heart ached. Sarah would have known exactly what to say right now. His late wife had always found the right words. "We'll open them soon," he promised, though they both knew what they'd find inside. Acceptance letters they couldn't afford to accept. The toast popped up, and he quickly buttered it. "Here's breakfast. Try to get a little more sleep before school." Emma took the toast but didn't move from the table. "Mom would want us to at least look at them." The words hit him like a physical blow. Sarah's voice echoed in his mind, clear as day. "Do what's right, not what's easy." It had been her mantra, the principle she'd lived by, the principle she'd died believing in. "Your mother." Michael's voice caught slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Your mother would want us to be practical too." He checked his watch, 6 a.m. "I've got to get moving, kiddo. This delivery could mean a promotion. Better pay." The rain started as Michael stepped outside, a steady drumming against the worn shingles of their modest home. He pulled his jacket closer, hurrying to his truck. The promotion would mean an extra $2 per hour. Not enough to cover college tuition, but maybe enough to start a small savings account. Maybe enough to keep hope alive. The truck's engine grumbled to life, and Michael adjusted the rearview mirror. Emma stood in the doorway, watching him leave, still holding her toast. She raised her hand in a small wave, and he waved back, feeling the familiar mix of pride and worry that had become his constant companion since Sarah's passing. The wipers squeaked across the windshield as he navigated the empty streets of Maple Grove. Most of the town was still asleep, the storefronts dark, the sidewalks empty. Only the early shift workers at Pete's Diner showed signs of life, their cars parked in the usual spots. Michael checked the delivery manifest clipped to his dashboard. The client was new, some big tech company that had recently moved into the area. His supervisor's words from yesterday rang in his ears. "This is a premium client, Turner. One mistake, one late delivery, and you're done. We can't afford to lose this contract." The digital clock on his dashboard blinked 6:30 a.m. He was 5 minutes behind schedule, already, thanks to a train crossing that had caught him off guard. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he turned onto rural Route 7, the rain now coming down in sheets. Through the fog and rain, the empty highway stretched ahead like a gray ribbon. Trees loomed on either side, their branches swaying in the wind. Michael leaned forward slightly, straining to see through the weather. The clock now read 6:35 a.m., 10 minutes behind. His thoughts drifted to the unopened letters on the kitchen table. Emma's future, sealed in those envelopes. She was so much like her mother, bright, determined, kind. Sarah would have moved heaven and earth to give Emma a chance at college. But Sarah wasn't here anymore, and Michael was doing his best to hold their world together with both hands. A shape emerged from the fog ahead. A car pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking weakly through the rain. As he drew closer, he could make out a small figure standing beside it, an elderly woman in a rain-soaked coat, looking lost and worried next to her clearly disabled vehicle. Michael glanced at the clock again. The delivery deadline loomed, his job hanging by a thread. The promotion that could help with Emma's future was slipping away with each passing minute. The old woman raised her hand tentatively as his truck approached, her face hopeful in the gray morning light. Through the rain-streaked windshield, Michael could see her clearly now, silver hair plastered to her forehead, holding an umbrella that had clearly seen better days. Standing beside a car with a visibly flat tire, she looked exactly like the kind of person Sarah would have stopped to help without a second thought. The windshield wipers swept back and forth in a steady rhythm, fighting against the intensifying rain. Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he spotted the stranded car ahead, its hazard lights blinking weakly through the gray morning mist. An elderly woman stood beside it, clutching her coat close against the wind and rain. His foot eased off the accelerator. The truck slowed. The digital clock on his dashboard seemed to mock him. 6:42 a.m. The delivery deadline was 7:15, and he still had 30 minutes of driving ahead. His supervisor's stern warning echoed in his mind. Turner, one more late delivery, and that's it. The woman looked so small standing there in the rain. She had to be at least in her 70s, her silver hair plastered to her face by the downpour. She held herself with dignity, despite her obvious distress, but Michael could see her hands trembling as she tried to shield herself from the rain. Just drive past. A voice in his head urged, someone else will help her. You can't afford to lose this job. The image of Emma's college acceptance letters flashed through his mind. They sat unopened on their kitchen table, like dreams wrapped in paper, waiting for money they didn't have. One late delivery could cost him everything they'd worked for. But then Emma's words from last week surfaced in his memory. They'd been looking through old photo albums, and she'd pointed to a picture of her mother helping a stranger change a tire. Dad, Mom would have stopped, she'd said, her eyes shining with pride. She always said that being kind matters more than being on time. Michael closed his eyes for a brief moment. Sarah would have stopped. She wouldn't have even hesitated. With a deep breath, he flicked on his turn signal and guided the truck onto the shoulder of the road. The gravel crunched under his tires as he pulled up behind the stranded vehicle. Grabbing his rain jacket from the passenger seat, he stepped out into the downpour. Cold droplets immediately found their way down his collar as he approached the woman. "Ma'am?" he called out, trying to project his voice over the sound of rain hitting pavement. "Are you all right?" The woman turned, relief washing over her face. Despite her bedraggled appearance, there was something graceful about her bearing, something that spoke of quiet strength. "Oh, thank heavens," she said. "I've been out here for almost an hour." "I'm Michael Turner," he said, extending his hand. "Looks like you might have a flat tire?" "Margaret Ellis," she replied, her hand small but warm in his. "And yes, I'm afraid so. I was on my way to visit my son when it happened. I tried calling for help, but my phone isn't getting any signal out here." She gestured helplessly at the tire. "I'm so sorry to be a bother." "Please don't feel obligated. I'm sure you have places to be." Michael glanced at his watch, then back at Margaret's concerned face. "It's no bother, Mrs. Ellis. Let me take a look." He knelt down in the mud to examine the flat tire. The rain drummed against his back as he located the jack in her trunk and began the familiar process of changing it. His clothes were getting soaked through, but he worked steadily, conscious of every passing minute. Margaret stood nearby, holding an umbrella she'd insisted on keeping over him despite his protests. "You're very kind, Mr. Turner," she said softly. "Not many people would stop these days." "My late wife always said kindness matters more than convenience," he replied, loosening the lug nuts. She was right about most things. The work took longer than usual, the lug nuts were stubborn, and the rain made everything slippery. Margaret tried to make conversation, but Michael's responses grew shorter as he watched the minutes tick by. Finally, he secured the spare tire and lowered the jack. "There you go, Mrs. Ellis," he said, wiping his muddy hands on his already ruined uniform pants. "The spare should get you where you need to go, but you'll want to have a proper tire fitted as soon as possible." "How can I ever thank you?" Margaret asked, genuine gratitude in her eyes. Michael managed a small smile, even as anxiety churned in his stomach. "No thanks needed. Just help someone else when you get the chance." He hurried back to his truck, leaving Margaret waving goodbye in his rearview mirror. Once inside, he pulled out his phone, dreading what he'd find. The screen lit up with the time, 7:12 a.m., 30 minutes late. His hands trembled slightly as he set the phone down. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the roof of the truck, but now it sounded less like music and more like a countdown to what was coming. Michael burst through the double doors of Reliable Logistics, his work shirt still damp from the morning rain that had turned his brief act of kindness into a career-ending disaster. His boots squeaked against the polished concrete as he rushed across the warehouse floor, dodging forklifts and pallets of merchandise. The familiar smell of cardboard and diesel fuel that had once meant security now felt like a trap closing around him. His footsteps echoed through the cavernous space as he made his way toward the dispatch office, past rows of delivery trucks and stacks of packages waiting to be sorted. There, silhouetted against the harsh fluorescent lights that cast everything in an unforgiving glare, stood Mr. Keene. His supervisor's thin frame was rigid with barely contained anger, arms crossed tightly over his pressed white shirt. His thin lips were pressed into a hard line that Michael had learned to fear over the past 5 years. "You're 73 minutes late, Turner." Mr. Keene's voice cut through the morning bustle of the warehouse like a blade. The words carried across the concrete floor, causing conversations to halt mid-sentence. Other workers paused in their tasks, casting worried glances in their direction. Some pretended to study their clipboards while straining to listen. Michael could feel the weight of their attention, the uncomfortable silence that always descended when Keene was about to make an example of someone. "I'm sorry, sir." Michael's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath, his heart still racing from his sprint across the parking lot. Droplets of rain clung to his graying hair and traced cold paths down his neck. There was an elderly woman stranded on Route 27. Her tire was completely flat, and in this weather, stop. Mr. Keene held up his hand with sharp finality, his gold wedding band catching the light. His steel-gray eyes narrowed behind wire-rimmed glasses, studying Michael like a specimen under a microscope. "Do you realize the Bradley account was depending on this morning's delivery? Do you have any idea what's at stake here?" "Yes, sir, I do. Michael's voice carried the exhaustion of a man who'd spent the last hour wrestling with a stubborn tire in the rain, his clothes still damp and his hands stained with grease he hadn't had time to wash off. "You just what?" Mr. Keene stepped closer, his polished leather shoes clicking against the concrete floor in a rhythm that reminded Michael of a countdown timer. The scent of expensive cologne couldn't quite mask the sharp edge of his supervisor's anger. "Decided to play roadside hero instead of doing the job you're paid to do?" Michael stood straighter despite the exhaustion weighing on his shoulders like a heavy coat. His back ached from bending over the elderly woman's car, but he held his ground. "She was alone, sir. It was raining hard. I couldn't just drive past someone who needed help. You're paid to deliver packages, not charity." Mr. Keene's voice rose deliberately, ensuring that every worker within 50 yards could hear every word. His tone carried the practiced cruelty of a man who'd learned that fear was more effective than respect. "This company doesn't run on good intentions, Turner. It runs on reliability, on deadlines, on promises kept to paying customers." The warehouse had gone completely quiet now, the usual hum of activity replaced by an uncomfortable tension. Michael could feel dozens of eyes on him, could sense his coworkers' discomfort radiating outward like heat from a furnace. Some looked away when he glanced in their direction, unable to meet his gaze. Others stared intently at their feet or suddenly found urgent tasks that required their immediate attention. The solidarity of working men had its limits when their own jobs might be on the line. "I've never been late before," Michael said softly, his voice barely carrying over the distant rumble of an idling truck. 5 years of perfect service. You know my record, sir. You know I've never let this company down." "Had." Mr. Keene's correction was sharp as broken glass, delivered with the satisfaction of a man who enjoyed having power over others. "Had a record, past tense." He pulled a crisp white form from his clipboard with deliberate slowness, making a show of the moment. "Clear out your locker. Security will escort you out." The termination notice trembled slightly in Michael's weathered hand as he stared at the words that would change everything for him and Emma. The paper felt heavier than it should, weighted with the knowledge that college applications cost money they didn't have, that rent was due in 2 weeks, that his daughter's future hung in the balance. Words of protest formed in his throat, explanations about the fear in the elderly woman's eyes, about the way she'd reminded him of his own mother, about the promise he'd made to his dying wife to always help those in need. But pride and 5 years of experience with Mr. Keene's rigid worldview kept those words locked away. His wife had always said dignity was worth more than dollars, even when dollars were scarce. "Sir," Michael managed, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his chest. He thought of Emma waiting at home, probably already planning how to celebrate his expected promotion. "I have a daughter to support. She's applying to colleges. You should have thought about that before abandoning your responsibilities, mister." Keene turned away with dismissive finality, his attention already moving to more important matters. "Jerry will cover your route from now on. At least he understands what actually matters in this business." Michael's callous fingers crumpled the edge of the termination notice as he fought the urge to explain what really mattered: kindness, compassion, treating people like human beings instead of obstacles to profit. He wanted to tell Mr. Keene about the elderly woman's gratitude, about how his wife would have never forgiven him for driving past someone in genuine need. But the rigid set of his supervisor's shoulders told him it would be like talking to a brick wall. A security guard appeared at his elbow, professional but clearly uncomfortable with his assignment. The man was young, maybe Emma's age, with apologetic eyes that suggested he understood the injustice of the situation. "This way, Mr. Turner," he said quietly, his voice carrying genuine regret. The walk to his locker felt like a death march, each step echoing through the warehouse that had been his second home for 5 years. Michael passed machinery he'd helped repair, coworkers he'd shared coffee breaks with, corners where he'd stored countless packages bound for grateful customers. The familiar sights now felt foreign, as if he were already a ghost haunting his former life. His locker stood in a row with dozens of others, each one representing a life, a family, dreams and fears and responsibilities. Michael's hands shook slightly as he turned the combination Emma's birthday, followed by his wedding anniversary. Inside were the small accumulations of half a decade. A coffee mug Emma had painted for him last Father's Day, decorated with crooked hearts and the words, "World's Best Dad," in her careful script. A small photo of his late wife taken on their honeymoon, her smile as bright as sunshine. His spare work shirt, freshly laundered and waiting for tomorrow's shift that would never come. They looked small and pathetic in the cardboard box the guard provided, like the remnants of a life that no longer existed. Whispers followed him through the warehouse as word spread of his termination. A few of his coworkers, the ones brave enough to risk Mr. Keene's displeasure, reached out to pat his shoulder or murmur words of support. "This ain't right, Mike." One of them said under his breath, "You're the best driver we got." But most stayed focused on their stations, their faces drawn with the uncomfortable knowledge that it could have been any of them standing in his shoes, carrying their belongings in a cardboard box. The security guard held the door open, and Michael stepped out into the cold drizzle that had started the whole chain of events. The box in his arms felt heavier than it should, weighted with 5 years of loyalty and dedication that had been dismissed in less than 5 minutes. Through the warehouse windows, he could see Mr. Keene already instructing Jerry on the day's route, pointing at maps and schedules as if the last 5 years of Michael's life could be erased as easily as pencil marks on paper. Standing there in the parking lot, his work boots slowly soaking through in the puddles that reflected the gray sky above, Michael wrestled with a question he never thought he'd have to ask himself. Had doing the right thing been wrong? The memory of the elderly woman's grateful smile flickered through his mind, the way she'd squeezed his hand and called him an angel, but it offered little warmth against the bitter chill of unemployment and uncertainty. He shifted the box in his arms, feeling the weight of his daughter's college dreams pressing down on his shoulders. The rain had lightened to a fine mist that seemed to seep into everything, but each drop felt like judgment falling from an uncaring sky. Somewhere in the distance, a truck horn honked, and life moved on as if nothing had changed, as if a good man's world hadn't just fallen apart for the simple crime of compassion. Michael took a deep breath of the cold, damp air and started walking toward his truck, each step taking him further from the only security he'd known since his wife's death, and closer to an uncertain future that would test every lesson about goodness and faith that he'd tried to teach his daughter. Michael slumped at the small kitchen table, his untouched coffee growing cold. The overhead light flickered again, a constant reminder of the overdue electric bill. Outside, the rain that had started this whole mess still drummed against the windows, matching the heavy rhythm in his chest. Emma sat across from him, pushing mac and cheese around her plate. The bright yellow pasta seemed like the only splash of color in their tired kitchen, with its worn linoleum floor and faded curtains. Her dark eyes, so much like her mother's, studied him with a mixture of worry and fierce protection. "It's not fair, Dad," she said, putting down her fork. "You were helping someone who needed it. That should count for something." Michael managed a smile, though it felt stiff on his face. "We'll manage, sweetheart." "We always do." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand, noticing how grown-up it looked now. When had that happened? The envelope burned in his back pocket, the eviction notice he'd found in today's mail. First warning, pay within 30 days or vacate. He couldn't let Emma see it. She carried enough worries for a 16-year-old as it was. "I could pick up some extra babysitting jobs," Emma offered, straightening in her chair. "The Hendersons said they'd love to have me watch the twins more often, and Mrs. Patterson's always asking, no." Michael's voice came out gentler than the word itself. "Your job is to focus on school. Those college applications aren't going to fill themselves out." Emma's face fell slightly. "But college costs money, Dad." "And if we can't, we'll figure it out," he interrupted, forcing confidence into his voice. "Remember what Mom always said about worry? It's like a rocking chair," Emma recited, with a small smile. "It gives you something to do but doesn't get you anywhere." The light flickered again, and Michael watched shadows dance across their small kitchen. The walls seemed to close in a bit, heavy with 6 years of memories since Sarah passed. The medical bills had taken their house back then. He'd promised himself they'd never face homelessness again, yet here they were. Emma pushed back her chair and came around the table. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders, and Michael felt a lump form in his throat. When had his little girl become the one doing the comforting? "Can we pray together?" she asked softly. "Like we used to when things got hard?" Michael nodded, unable to speak for a moment. They hadn't prayed together in a while, not since the anniversary of Sarah's passing 3 months ago. Emma pulled her chair closer, and they joined hands across the corner of the table. "Dear God," Emma began, her voice steady and clear. "We know you have a plan, even when we can't see it. Please help something good come out of today. Help Dad find an even better job, one where being kind isn't something to be punished for. And," she squeezed his hand, "thank you for giving me the best father in the world." Michael's eyes burned as he listened to his daughter's prayer. The faith in her voice made his own doubts feel shameful. When she finished, he kept holding her hand, drawing strength from her certainty. "Your turn, Dad," she whispered. "Lord," he started, his voice rough. "Thank you for Emma, for her heart, for her strength." He had to pause, gathering himself. "Help me be the father she deserves. Help me provide for her, and help me understand if I did the right thing today." They sat in silence after the amen, listening to the rain. Emma eventually went to finish her homework, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. He pulled the eviction notice from his pocket, staring at the harsh black letters until they blurred. Rising from the table, he walked to the window. The streetlight cast a weak glow through the rain, illuminating puddles on their small patch of lawn. Somewhere out there, an elderly woman was warm and safe because he'd stopped to help, but at what cost to his daughter? Michael pressed his forehead against the cool glass, watching his breath fog the pain. "God," he murmured, barely a whisper, "please tell me I did the right thing." Behind him, the kitchen light flickered one more time, casting strange shadows on the walls of their small home walls that might not be theirs for much longer. The morning sun struggled through the clouds as Michael stood in his kitchen, mechanically going through the motions of making coffee. The events of yesterday felt almost surreal, like a bad dream he couldn't shake off. The coffee maker sputtered and hissed, filling the quiet house with its familiar aroma. Emma had already left for school, insisting she'd take the bus instead of letting him drive her. A gentle knock at the front door pulled him from his thoughts. He wasn't expecting anyone, and bill collectors usually didn't come this early. Wiping his hands on his worn jeans, he made his way to the door. When he opened it, his eyebrows shot up in surprise. There stood Margaret, the elderly woman from yesterday, holding what appeared to be a foil-covered pie. She looked different in the morning light, elegant in a powder blue sweater, her silver hair neatly styled, and warm brown eyes twinkling with life. "Good morning," she said, holding up the pie. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Michael blinked, momentarily speechless. "No, not at all. I'm just surprised to see you." "Well, I couldn't let my kind stranger who saved an old fool go without a proper thank you, now could I?" She smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "May I come in?" "Of course, please." Michael stepped aside, suddenly aware of the modest state of his home. The furniture was well worn, and the walls needed a fresh coat of paint, but everything was clean and tidy. "I just made coffee, if you'd like some." "That would be lovely." Margaret walked in with surprising grace, taking in her surroundings with appreciation rather than judgment. "You have a beautiful home. It feels lived in, loved." Michael led her to the kitchen, pulling out a chair at the small table. "If you don't mind my asking, how did you find my address?" Margaret set the pie on the table and settled into the chair. "Oh, I asked that wonderful mechanic you recommended, Tom, I believe. He spoke very highly of you." Michael poured 2 cups of coffee, setting one before Margaret, along with cream and sugar. "That was very kind of you to bring this, but really unnecessary." "Nonsense." She waved away his protest. And before I forget, she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. Michael immediately recognized the shape of a check and shook his head. "No, please, I can't accept payment for helping someone in need. But you lost your job because of me." Margaret insisted, her face etched with concern. "That's not your fault." Michael sat down across from her, wrapping his hands around his coffee mug. "I made that choice." Margaret studied him for a long moment, then tucked the envelope away. "You're a rare sort, you know that? In today's world, most people would have driven right past. My late wife would have stopped," Michael said softly. "She always said that faith without action isn't really faith at all." "Ah," Margaret nodded, her eyes softening. "How long has she been gone?" 5 years this August." Michael took a sip of coffee. "Some days it feels like yesterday." "I understand completely. I lost my Henry 3 years ago." Margaret reached across the table and patted his hand. "The loneliness never quite goes away, does it?" "No," Michael agreed. "But I have Emma, my daughter. She makes it easier." "Tell me about her," Margaret encouraged, settling back with her coffee. For the next hour, they talked. About everything and nothing. Michael found himself sharing stories about Emma's childhood, his struggles as a single parent, and his hopes for her future. Margaret listened with genuine interest, occasionally offering gentle wisdom that reminded him of his own mother. She told him about her years as a literature professor, her love of piano, and her volunteer work at various charities. There was something comforting about her presence, like talking to a favorite aunt or a longtime friend, rather than a stranger he'd met just yesterday. "You know," Margaret said, finally standing to leave, "you have no idea how important this meeting will become." Michael chuckled, walking her to the door. "Well, it's already brightened my morning considerably." Michael sat in his truck, staring at yet another not hiring sign through the windshield. This was the 4th repair shop he'd tried today, and like all the others, they'd turned him away with apologetic smiles and empty promises to keep his application on file. His calloused hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white with frustration. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Main Street as he drove past the familiar storefronts of Maple Grove. Every help wanted sign he'd followed this week had led nowhere. The local hardware store, 3 warehouses, and even the grocery store's loading dock, all dead ends. Back home, Michael stood in his garage, running his hands over his toolbox. These tools had been his companions for 20 years, each one carrying memories of jobs well done. The socket wrench set his wife had given him for their 10th anniversary. The precision screwdrivers Emma had saved up to buy him last Father's Day, but sentiment wouldn't pay the bills. "Dad?" Emma's voice carried from the kitchen door. "What are you doing?" Michael straightened up, forcing a smile. "Just organizing, sweetheart. These old tools might fetch a decent price at Murphy's Pawn." Emma's face fell. "But Dad, those are your good tools. You love them. They're just things, Emma." He closed the toolbox with a decisive click. "And things can be replaced. What matters is keeping a roof over our heads." Later that afternoon, Murphy's pawn shop offered him less than half what the tools were worth. Michael accepted without haggling. Pride was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. The wadded bills in his pocket would cover this month's rent, barely. Emma waited for him at home with a plate of grilled cheese sandwiches. "I made dinner," she announced proudly. "And guess what, Mrs. Peterson next door says she needs someone to help with her garden on weekends." I told her I could do it. Michael's throat tightened. His 16-year-old shouldn't have to worry about money. "That's thoughtful, honey, but you need to focus on your studies." "Dad, I want to help." Emma's eyes, so like her mother's, held a determined gleam. "And besides, I love gardening. Remember how Mom used to let me help with her flowers?" Michael nodded, unable to speak for a moment. His daughter's unwavering optimism both lifted and humbled him. The next day found Michael at Wilson's grocery, picking up the basics with what little cash remained. He was comparing prices on bread when a familiar voice called out, "Mr. Turner?" Margaret stood by the produce section, a small basket hanging from her arm. Her elegant appearance seemed at odds with the fluorescent lighting and linoleum floors, but her warm smile was genuine. "Mrs. Ellis," Michael said, surprised to find himself genuinely pleased to see her. "How's the car running?" "Like a dream, thanks to you." She glanced at his nearly empty cart. "Would you join me for a moment? These old eyes aren't what they used to be, and I could use help reading some labels." Michael knew she was making up an excuse to talk, but he appreciated the dignity of it. They walked the aisles together, chatting about small things: the weather, Emma's school, the rising price of coffee. Margaret had a way of listening that made even mundane conversations feel meaningful. "You know," she said as they reached the checkout, "I was just thinking how lovely it would be to have company for Sunday tea. Would you and Emma consider joining me, say, around 2 o'clock? Michael hesitated. The invitation was unexpected, and part of him wanted to decline, to protect his pride perhaps, or avoid charity. But something in Margaret's expression stopped him. Behind her poise, he recognized a familiar loneliness. "That's very kind of you," he began carefully. "Oh, please say yes," Margaret pressed gently. "My house is far too quiet these days, and I make far too many cookies for just one person." A smile tugged at Michael's lips. "Well, when you put it that way, I suppose we could stop by." "Wonderful." Margaret's face lit up. "I'll text you my address. You do text, don't you?" "Yes, ma'am. Emma made sure I learned." They exchanged numbers, and Michael found himself looking forward to Sunday. As he helped load Margaret's groceries into her car, despite her protest that she could manage, he felt a small spark of hope kindle in his chest. That evening, after a simple dinner of soup and crackers, Michael sat in his favorite armchair, watching Emma do her homework at the kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the scratch of her pencil and the distant hum of traffic. For the first time in days, the weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. Sometimes, he reflected, hope came in unexpected forms, like an elderly woman's invitation to tea. What he didn't know was that at that very moment, a video was being uploaded to social media. A bystander had filmed his roadside rescue of Margaret the week before, capturing his quiet act of kindness in the rain. Soon, that simple moment would change everything. But for now, Michael simply sat in his chair, grateful for small mercies and the promise of Sunday tea. The sharp rapping at his front door jolted Michael awake. Sunlight streamed through his bedroom window as he fumbled for his phone. 7:15 a.m. The knocking continued, more insistent now. "Coming, coming," he called, pulling on his worn blue robe. Who could be here this early on a Saturday? He opened the door to find Sarah Jenkins, his next-door neighbor, practically bouncing on his front step. Her graying hair was still in curlers, and she clutched her tablet to her chest like a precious treasure. "Michael, oh my goodness, have you seen it?" Her eyes were wide with excitement. "You're all over the internet." "I'm what?" Michael rubbed his eyes, still groggy. "Here, look." Sarah thrust the tablet at him. On the screen was a video titled "Single Dad Fired After Helping Elderly Woman." The view counter showed over 2 million hits. Michael's stomach dropped as he watched the shaky footage. Someone had recorded him changing Margaret's tire in the rain that day. The camera angle caught his gentle patience as he worked, the way he'd helped her back into her car, even the final wave as he'd driven away, knowing he was already late. "The comments, Michael. You need to read the comments." Sarah scrolled down, revealing thousands of responses. This is what real heroes look like. Who fires someone for helping an old lady? Shame on that company. We need more people like this in the world. The house phone started ringing inside. Emma appeared in the hallway, her hair messy from sleep. "Dad, what's going on?" Before he could answer, his cell phone buzzed in his robe pocket. Unknown number. "You better come in, Sarah," Michael said quietly, stepping aside. In the kitchen, the house phone rang again. Emma answered it this time. "Hello? Oh, no comment, please." She hung up, looking bewildered. That was someone from Channel 5 News. Michael's cell phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. "Dad, you're trending on Twitter," Emma said, scrolling through her phone. "People are calling you." Number Roadside Angel. Sarah sat at their kitchen table, still clutching her tablet. "And that's not even the biggest news," she said. "They're saying the woman you helped? That was Margaret Ellis, President Ellis's mother." "What?" Michael and Emma said in unison. Sarah nodded vigorously. "The White House just confirmed it. Look." She pulled up another news article. There was Margaret's photo, the same kind face, but now beside a picture of the president. The headline read, "President's Mother Rescued by Good Samaritan." Michael sank into a kitchen chair. This can't be happening. The phones kept ringing. Emma's cell joined the chorus. Through the window, Michael spotted a news van pulling up outside. "We should talk to them," Emma said, her eyes bright. "Dad, people need to hear this story. They need to know there are still good people in the world." Michael shook his head. "I didn't do it for attention, sweetheart. That's exactly why people love it," Sarah chimed in. "You had no idea who she was. You just helped because it was right." More vehicles were arriving outside. Michael could see people with cameras setting up on his front lawn. Emma touched his arm. "Dad, remember what Mom always said about letting your light shine? The world finally sees what I see in you, someone who always does the right thing, no matter what it costs." The house phone rang again. This time, Sarah answered it. "Turner Residence." "Yes, he's here, but—" She covered the receiver. "It's CNN." Michael buried his face in his hands. Through the gaps in his fingers, he could see the TV they'd left on from the night before. The president's press secretary had just stepped up to a podium, the White House seal behind her. The president's mother, Mrs. Margaret Ellis, was indeed assisted by a private citizen last Tuesday morning, the press secretary announced. Mr. Michael Turner stopped to help her change a flat tire, despite knowing it would make him late for work, an act which subsequently cost him his job. The president wants to be clear. Mr. Turner represents the best of America. His selfless actions remind us that ordinary citizens doing extraordinary things is what makes this nation great. Emma squeezed her father's shoulder. Outside, more news vans were arriving. The phones wouldn't stop ringing. Michael stared at the TV screen, remembering Margaret's words when she'd brought that pie. "You have no idea how important this meeting will become." Now he understood. The doorbell chimed. Through the window, cameras flashed. Sarah peeked through the curtains. "Channel 7 is here too now, and I think that's Good Morning America setting up across the street." Michael looked at his daughter, at the pride shining in her eyes. He thought of Margaret, wondering if she'd known this would happen. He thought of his late wife, and what she would say about all this attention for a simple act of kindness. The press secretary continued speaking on TV. "The president has personally requested to speak with Mr. Turner to express his gratitude for the compassion shown to his mother." "Dad," Emma said softly, "sometimes doing the right thing leads to more than we expect." Michael sat there, surrounded by ringing phones and flashing cameras. His simple act of roadside kindness, now a national story. The morning sun streamed through his kitchen window, warming his face as he watched the press secretary on screen, still trying to process how helping a stranded elderly woman had turned his world upside down overnight. The late morning sun filled Michael's modest kitchen as he sorted through a stack of bills at the table. His phone buzzed against the wood, making him jump. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number with a Washington, D.C. area code. Michael's hand trembled slightly as he picked up the phone. "Hello? Mr. Turner? Please hold for the President of the United States." Michael's coffee mug stopped halfway to his mouth. The world seemed to tilt sideways for a moment. Before he could process what was happening, a warm, authoritative voice came through the speaker. "Mr. Turner? This is William Ellis. I believe you've met my mother, Margaret." Michael sank into his kitchen chair. "Yes, sir, Mr. President. I did. Please, call me William." The president's voice carried a genuine warmth that put Michael slightly more at ease. "I wanted to personally thank you for helping my mother that day. She told me everything. How you stopped without hesitation, got soaked to the bone changing her tire, and never once complained. Anyone would have done the same, sir." Michael managed to say, his throat tight with emotion. "But they didn't, Michael. You did." The president paused. "And I understand it cost you your job." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I don't want any special treatment. I just did what was right. That's exactly why I'm calling." The president's voice grew more animated. "We need more people like you, Michael. People who choose kindness over convenience, who do the right thing, even when it hurts. Which is why I'd like to invite you and your daughter Emma to visit us at the White House this weekend." Michael's free hand gripped the edge of the table. The White House?" "My mother insists," the president chuckled. "And believe me, when Margaret Ellis insists on something, even the president knows better than to argue." Despite his shock, Michael found himself laughing too. "She is quite persuasive. We'll arrange everything. Flights, accommodations, all of it. What do you say?" Michael thought of Emma, of how her eyes would light up at this news. "Thank you, Mr. President. We'd be honored." After working out the details, Michael sat in stunned silence for several minutes. His phone rang again. This time it was Margaret. So, her familiar voice carried a hint of mischief. "I hear you've been invited to a rather important house." "Margaret!" Michael exclaimed. "Did you plan this? Me? I'm just a helpless old woman who needed assistance with a flat tire." Her laugh was warm and knowing. "Though I did tell you our meeting would become important, didn't I?" "You did?" Michael shook his head in amazement. "I just never imagined." "Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness have the biggest ripples, Michael." Her voice softened. "You helped me that day not because of who I was, but because of who you are. That's what matters." After hanging up, Michael could barely contain himself until Emma got home from school. When she walked through the door, backpack slung over her shoulder, he was practically bouncing on his feet. "Dad?" Emma looked concerned. "Are you okay?" "The president called today," he said, watching her face. Emma's backpack hit the floor with a thud. "What? We're going to the White House this weekend?" The words felt surreal even as he said them. Emma's hands flew to her mouth. "No way. No way." She launched herself at him, wrapping him in a fierce hug. When she pulled back, tears sparkled in her eyes. "Dad, this is incredible." Michael held his daughter close, his own eyes growing misty. "I know, sweetheart. I know." That evening, as they pulled suitcases from the closet and began to pack, Emma couldn't stop smiling. She carefully folded her best dress, then paused to watch her father sort through his clothes. "Dad?" she said softly. Mom would be so proud of you right now." Michael's hands stilled on the shirt he was folding. He looked at their small living room, at the bills on the kitchen table, at his daughter's shining face, and felt a wave of peace wash over him. "Maybe," he whispered, more to himself than to Emma, "maybe there's a reason for everything after all." The next morning's sun would bring new challenges and adventures, but for now, in their humble home filled with love and hope, father and daughter packed their bags for a journey neither could have imagined just days before. The morning air felt different at the small regional airport, crisp with possibility. Michael Turner stood at the check-in counter, fumbling with their freshly printed boarding passes while Emma bounced on her toes beside him, her eyes bright with excitement. "Dad, I can't believe we're actually flying." Emma clutched her worn backpack, which contained her journal and favorite pen. She'd insisted on documenting every moment of this unexpected journey. Michael managed a nervous smile. "First time for everything, sweetheart." His own stomach was doing flips, though not entirely from pre-flight jitters. The past 24 hours had been a whirlwind since the president's call. The gate area was busier than usual, with several people stealing glances at them. A few held up phones, obviously recognizing them from the viral video. Michael kept his head down, focusing on Emma's joy instead of the attention. "Now boarding flight 238 to Washington, D.C., the gate agent announced over the speakers. Emma grabbed her father's hand. "That's us." They made their way down the narrow airplane aisle, Emma insisting on the window seat. Michael squeezed his tall frame into the middle seat, thankful the airline had kept the adjacent seat empty for privacy. "Look how tiny everything is." Emma pressed her face against the small window as they took off, watching their hometown shrink beneath them. "Dad, the cars look like ants." Michael relaxed slightly, letting his daughter's wonder wash over him. Her excitement was contagious, and for a moment, he forgot about the cameras waiting in D.C. The flight attendant stopped by their row. "Mr. Turner, the captain asked me to give you these." She handed them both warm chocolate chip cookies. "He said to thank you for reminding everyone what kindness looks like." Emma beamed at her father, who blushed and quietly thanked the attendant. Throughout the 2-hour flight, similar small gestures kept occurring, a passenger sending back a thank you note, the co-pilot stopping by during his break to shake Michael's hand. When they landed at Reagan National Airport, a smartly dressed woman in her 30s waited at the gate holding a sign that read, "Turner Family." "Mr. Turner, I'm Sarah Chen, Mrs. Ellis's personal assistant." She extended her hand warmly. "Margaret asked me to ensure you're comfortable during your stay." They followed Sarah through the terminal, where several passengers and airport staff stopped to watch them pass. Michael kept a protective arm around Emma's shoulders, nodding politely but not engaging. Their hotel, while not luxurious, was the nicest place they'd ever stayed. The room had 2 queen beds with crisp white linens and a view of the city skyline. "Mrs. Ellis thought you'd be more comfortable here than at one of the larger hotels," Sarah explained. "It's more private, and the press doesn't know this location." Emma explored the room, touching everything with reverent fingers. "Dad, look! They left us chocolates on the pillows." A small group of reporters waited outside when they left for their White House visit, but Sarah efficiently guided them through a side entrance to a waiting car with tinted windows. "Just smile and keep walking," she advised. "You're handling this all very gracefully." The White House security check was thorough but respectful. Emma couldn't stop grinning as they received their visitor badges. Michael's hands were sweating as they walked through the historic halls. They entered the map room, where Margaret Ellis stood waiting, her face lighting up at the sight of them. She wore a simple blue dress that somehow made her look both regal and approachable. "My roadside angel." She stepped forward to embrace Michael, then turned to Emma. "And this must be the wonderful daughter I've heard so much about." Before Emma could respond, President William Ellis entered the room. He was taller in person than he appeared on television, with his mother's kind eyes and an easy smile that made Michael feel slightly less overwhelmed. "Mr. Turner," the president extended his hand. "Thank you for taking care of my mother when I couldn't be there." "Anyone would have done the same, sir," Michael replied quietly. "That's where you're wrong," President Ellis said, his voice firm but warm. "Not everyone would have sacrificed their job to help a stranger. We're going to make this right." Margaret touched Michael's arm gently. "William means it. We take care of those who take care of others." They stood beneath the towering portrait of Abraham Lincoln, its solemn presence adding weight to the moment. Margaret leaned close to Michael and whispered, "This is only the beginning." Emma squeezed her father's hand, and Michael felt tears prick at his eyes. In the space of a week, they'd gone from desperate worry to standing in the White House. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, he let himself believe that sometimes doing the right thing really did lead to something good. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the historic room as they stood together, an unlikely group brought together by a simple act of kindness on a rainy morning. The rose garden bloomed with late spring flowers in full glory, their sweet perfume mixing with the earthy scent of fresh-cut grass under the brilliant morning sunday. Neat rows of white chairs stretched across the manicured lawn, each one facing a small mahogany podium where the presidential seal gleamed like burnished gold. Michael Turner stood quietly to the side near a towering magnolia tree, his callous fingers tugging nervously at his borrowed navy tie while television cameras hummed and whirred from every angle. Photographers jostled for position behind velvet ropes, their long lenses catching every moment. The morning air buzzed with anticipation. Secret Service agents stood at careful intervals, their dark suits stark against the garden's vibrant colors. Cabinet, members, and distinguished guests filled the front rows, their whispered conversations creating a low murmur that mixed with the distant sounds of traffic beyond the White House gates. Emma reached over and straightened his collar with gentle fingers, her touch as soft as her mother's had been. "You look perfect, Dad," she whispered, her young face absolutely glowing with pride. She wore the simple blue dress they'd bought yesterday at a department store near their hotel, but she carried herself with the natural grace that reminded Michael so much of Sarah. Margaret Ellis sat in the front row like a queen, holding court, elegant, in a powder blue suit that complemented her silver hair perfectly. Her weathered hands rested gracefully on her purse, and when she caught Michael's eye, she gave him a gentle wink that somehow steadied his racing heart. Despite her frail appearance, her presence commanded quiet respect from everyone around her. The president stepped to the podium with measured confidence, his tall frame casting a shadow across the seal. The crowd fell silent instantly, hundreds of faces turning toward him with rapt attention. Even the birds seemed to pause their singing as his presence commanded the garden. Today we honor a man who reminds us what America truly stands for. The president's voice rang clear and strong across the garden, carrying easily to the back rows without need for amplification. Michael Turner didn't know he was helping my mother that rainy morning 3 weeks ago. He had no idea who she was. He simply saw another human being in need and chose to act with compassion. The president paused, letting his words sink in. In a world that often rewards selfishness, Michael chose selflessness. In a moment when taking the easy path would have cost him nothing, he chose the harder road of kindness. And in doing so, he lost his job but gained something far more valuable. He reminded us all who we're supposed to be. Camera flashes exploded, like tiny fireworks as Michael stepped forward on unsteady legs. The grass felt soft beneath his polished shoes, shoes that Emma had helped him pick out because his work boots didn't seem right for such an occasion. His work-worn hands trembled slightly as the president lifted the medal from its velvet case, the golden disc catching the sunlight as it settled around Michael's neck. The weight of it felt substantial against his chest, but not as heavy as the emotion that threatened to close his throat. The medal bore the image of an eagle in flight, wings spread wide above the words, Presidential Medal of Freedom. Michael had never imagined such a thing could belong to him, a simple mechanic from a small town who just wanted to do right by his daughter. When it was his turn to speak, Michael gripped the podium edges so tightly his knuckles went white. He looked out at the sea of expectant faces, reporters with notebooks ready, distinguished guests leaning forward in their chairs, and television cameras broadcasting his image to millions of homes across the country. The magnitude of the moment threatened to overwhelm him. He spotted Emma in the front row, tears streaming down her cheeks as she nodded encouragingly. Her faith in him shone from her eyes like sunlight, giving him the strength he needed. Margaret sat beside her, dabbing at her own eyes with a lace handkerchief, her smile warm and proud. "I'm not much for fancy speeches," Michael began, his voice quiet but surprisingly steady as it carried across the silent garden. "That morning, 3 weeks ago, I wasn't thinking about medals or recognition or any of this. I was actually running late for work, worried about making my delivery on time." A gentle laugh rippled through the crowd at his honesty. "But when I saw that elderly lady, Mrs. Ellis, standing in the rain next to her car, everything else just stopped mattering." He paused, swallowing hard as the memory came flooding back. "My late wife, Sarah, always told me, 'Do what's right, not what's easy.' Those were her words, and they've guided me every day since she passed." That morning was no different. His voice grew stronger as he continued. "I didn't help Mrs. Ellis because I thought it would lead to anything good for me. Truth is, helping her cost me my job, and I went home that night not knowing how I'd pay the rent or put food on the table. But I'd do it again in a heartbeat, because kindness shouldn't need a reason. It shouldn't need cameras or rewards or recognition. It should just be who we are to each other." The garden had gone completely still. Even the photographers had lowered their cameras, caught up in his simple, heartfelt words. "That's the world I want my daughter to live in," Michael said, his eyes finding Emma's face again. "A world where we stop for each other, where we choose compassion over convenience, where we remember that every person we meet is somebody's child, somebody's parent, somebody's whole world." The garden erupted in thunderous applause that seemed to shake the very trees. Several hardened journalists wiped their eyes, their notepads completely forgotten. The president stepped forward and clasped Michael's shoulder, genuine respect and admiration shining in his eyes. "Thank you, Michael Turner," the president said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for reminding us all what true heroism looks like." Afterward, as the formal ceremony wound down, reporters swarmed around Emma like bees drawn to honey. She stood beside a blooming rose bush, its pink petals creating a perfect backdrop as she fielded their questions with natural poise that amazed everyone present. Her words about her father were heartfelt and articulate, capturing the nation's attention in a way that no political speech ever could. "My dad's always been my hero," she told them, her voice clear and strong despite her youth. "Long before any of this happened, long before anyone else knew his name, he's the man who held me when I cried, who taught me right from wrong, who worked 2 jobs to keep food on our table after Mom died. Now the whole world gets to see what I've known my whole life, that goodness still exists, and it lives in people like my father." The afternoon dissolved into a whirlwind of handshakes and business cards that Michael barely had time to process. A major automotive company wanted him as their national spokesman, offering a salary that would change their lives forever. 3 different publishing houses competed aggressively for the rights to his life story, each one promising bestseller status. A national charity foundation offered him a position as their goodwill ambassador, complete with speaking tours and humanitarian missions around the world. Through it all, Michael felt like he was watching someone else's life unfold. The attention, the opportunities, the sudden wealth of possibilities, it all seemed surreal after years of simply struggling to get by. Margaret appeared at his elbow during a rare, quiet moment between interviews, moving slowly but with quiet dignity. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" she said softly, her eyes twinkling with understanding. Michael nodded, watching Emma give yet another interview to a group of reporters who hung on her every word. "I never wanted any of this, Mrs. Ellis. I just wanted to take care of my daughter, to give her the chances I never had." "Sometimes," Margaret replied, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "The best way to take care of our children is to show them how to live with integrity. You've done that beautifully, Michael. Sarah would be so proud." Her mention of his late wife sent a familiar ache through his chest, but it was a good ache, the kind that reminded him of love rather than loss. Later that evening, back in their hotel suite overlooking the National Mall, Michael tucked Emma into the crisp white sheets just like he had when she was small. The sounds of the crowd outside filtered through the thick windows. Reporters and well-wishers still gathered on the sidewalk below, occasionally breaking into spontaneous chants of his name that echoed off the surrounding buildings. Emma snuggled under the covers, her eyes heavy with the happy exhaustion that comes from a perfect day. The medal sat on the dresser across the room, catching the lamplight and casting small rainbows on the wall. "Dad?" she said sleepily. "Yes, sweetheart?" "Maybe our luck has finally changed." Michael smoothed her hair back from her forehead, his fingers gentle and familiar with the motion, just like her mother used to do during bedtime stories and whispered prayers. Outside, another chant of "Michael! Michael!" rose into the night air, but here in the quiet sanctuary of their room, it felt distant and dreamlike. He looked at his daughter's peaceful face, so much like Sarah's when she slept, and then at the medal glinting on the dresser. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a struggling single father, one paycheck away from disaster. Tonight, he was a national hero with opportunities beyond his wildest dreams. It was almost too much to believe. "Maybe it has, Emma," he whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Maybe it has." Through the window, the Washington Monument stood like a white sentinel against the star-filled sky, its beacon light sweeping slowly across the darkness. Below on the street, camera flashes continued to light up the night like scattered fireflies, each one representing someone who wanted to capture just one more glimpse of the man who had reminded America what truly mattered. As Michael finally settled into his own bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger than himself, something that would test not just his newfound fame, but the very character that had brought him here in the first place. Back in Maple Grove, the morning sun cast long shadows across Michael Turner's front lawn, where 3 flower bouquets already sat waiting on the doorstep. Mrs. Peterson from next door waved enthusiastically as she walked her dog past the house, calling out, "There's our hometown hero." Michael managed a polite smile as he collected the flowers and morning paper. The front page showed him again, accepting the medal in Washington. He set both items on the kitchen counter, where similar bouquets and newspapers had accumulated over the past week. Emma bounded down the stairs, already dressed for school. "Dad, look! The church bulletin mentioned you again." She held up the paper, beaming. "They want you to speak at the youth group about doing the right thing." "That's the 3rd church this week," Michael said, running his hand through his graying hair. He glanced at his phone, 15 new messages, mostly from TV producers and journalists. The doorbell rang. This time it was Bob from the hardware store, holding a casserole. "Martha insisted," he said, grinning. "Least we could do for Maple Grove's finest citizen." Throughout the morning, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. A producer from Good Morning America wanted him for their Everyday Heroes segment. 3 radio stations requested interviews. The local newspaper needed more photos. During lunch, Michael sat with Emma at their usual diner booth, but nothing felt usual anymore. People kept stopping by their table, wanting handshakes or photos. The waitress refused to let them pay, calling it "on the house for our celebrity." "Celebrity," Michael muttered, picking at his untouched sandwich. "For changing a tire." Emma reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "It's more than that, Dad. You lost everything to help someone. People need stories like yours right now." That afternoon, Michael met with a local business advisor who'd offered free consultation. Together, they drafted plans for Emma's Hope, a foundation to help struggling single parents find employment and support. The idea had come to him during sleepless nights, remembering his own desperate job searches. "The timing is perfect," the advisor said, spreading papers across his desk. "You've got national attention, corporate sponsors interested, and a compelling personal story. We've already received $50,000 in pledged donations." Michael nodded, but his stomach churned. The numbers felt unreal, more money than he'd seen in years. all because of one rainy morning's decision. At home that evening, his phone rang again. This time, the familiar warm voice brought genuine comfort. "Michael, dear," Margaret said, "how are you holding up under all this attention?" He sank into his armchair, tension easing from his shoulders. "It's overwhelming. I keep telling people I'm no hero. That's exactly why you are one." Margaret chuckled. "Listen, I've lived in the public eye for decades. The spotlight feels harsh at first, but you can use it to do real good. This foundation of yours, tell me more." For an hour, they talked about Emma's hope, with Margaret offering wise counsel about structure and sustainability. Her guidance felt like a lifeline in the chaos his life had become. "You remind me so much of my late husband," she said softly. He believed one person could make a difference, too. After they hung up, Michael stared at his phone's screen. 27 new messages blinked at him. A church in Cleveland wanted him to headline their charity gala. A morning show needed him in New York next week. A publisher suggested a book deal. The local news played in the background, showing footage of him in Washington again. "Maple Grove's Michael Turner continues to inspire the nation," the anchor announced. "The single father who lost his job for an act of kindness has become a symbol of." Michael pressed the power button, silencing the TV. He picked up a framed photo of his late wife from the side table. "What would you make of all this?" he whispered. Emma appeared in the doorway, holding another stack of mail. "3 more interview requests," she said. "And the mayor wants you to grand marshal the 4th of July parade." Michael sighed heavily, turning off his phone. "I helped one woman change a tire. That's all I did. Now everyone wants a piece of me." He looked at the pile of unopened mail, interview requests, and speaking invitations scattered across the coffee table. When did doing the right thing become such a circus? Emma sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder like she used to do when she was little. "Maybe because it's getting rare," she said quietly. "Maybe people need to be reminded that good people still exist." Through the window, another news van crept slowly past their house, camera pointed at their front door. Michael drew the curtains closed, retreating from the watchful eyes of a world that seemed desperate for heroes, even ones as ordinary as him. The late afternoon sun painted Margaret's garden in warm, golden hues as Michael parked his truck along the circular driveway of her estate. The security detail, now familiar with his visits, nodded politely as he passed through the gate. Though he'd been here several times since their return from Washington, something about Margaret's phone call this morning had felt different, more urgent. He found her sitting on a white wrought iron bench beneath a flowering dogwood tree. She wore a pale blue cardigan despite the warm weather, and her silver hair caught the sunlight like spun silk. Her smile, though warm as ever, carried a hint of weariness. "Michael, dear friend." She patted the space beside her. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Of course, Margaret." He settled next to her, noting how the garden buzzed with life, bees humming among the roses, birds chirping in the trees. "Your garden's beautiful today, isn't it?" Her eyes swept across the carefully tended flower beds. "I've always found peace here. It's one of the few places where I can just be myself, not someone's mother or widow or public figure." Michael sensed the weight in her words. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a butterfly dance from bloom to bloom. "There's something I need to tell you," Margaret said finally, her voice soft but steady. "Something I haven't shared with many people yet." She turned to face him, her eyes clear and direct. "I've been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He instinctively reached for her hand, which felt small and cool in his grasp. "Margaret, I'm so sorry." She squeezed his fingers gently. "Don't be, dear. I've lived a full life. But I have maybe 6 months, according to the doctors." Her voice remained remarkably calm. "William, the president, he knows, of course, but we've kept it private. The media circus would be unbearable." Michael watched a shadow pass across her face. The breeze stirred the dogwood blossoms, sending white petals drifting around them like snow. "You know what troubles me most," Margaret continued, absently touching the pearl necklace at her throat. "When I'm gone, they'll reduce my entire life to a headline. President's mother dies. As if that's all I ever was." She looked down at their joined hands. "I was a professor for 30 years. I raised money for literacy programs. I played concert piano. I loved poetry and gardening and teaching young minds to think for themselves. But none of that will matter to the newspapers." "It matters." Michael said firmly. It matters to everyone whose life you touched. It matters to me. Margaret's eyes grew misty. That's why I wanted to tell you. You see people, Michael, really see them. Not their titles or positions, just their humanity. That day on the road, you didn't stop because I was anyone important. You stopped because I needed help. Michael remembered the rain, the simple choice that had changed everything. I stopped because it was right. Exactly. Margaret straightened her shoulders. And that's why I trust you with this. Not just the news about my health, but with understanding who I really am. They talked for hours as the sun began its descent. Margaret shared stories from her teaching days, her eyes lighting up as she described inspiring students to love literature. She spoke about her late husband, about raising William, about the small moments that had shaped her life. Michael listened, recognizing in her words the same quiet wisdom that had drawn him to her friendship. "Will you visit when you can?" she asked as the evening grew cool. "I'd like to spend my remaining time with people who know me as Margaret, not just as the president's mother." "As often as you'll have me," Michael promised, helping her stand from the bench. "And I'll bring Emma. She adores you." Margaret smiled, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You're both such a blessing. God does work in mysterious ways, doesn't he? Who would have thought a flat tire would bring such friendship into my life?" As they walked slowly toward the house, Margaret leaning slightly on his arm, she added, "Promise me one thing, anything. Help people remember me as I really was. Not the titles or the trappings, but the woman who believed in kindness, in education, in the power of one person to make a difference." "I promise," Michael said solemnly. Later, as he drove home through the gathering dusk, tears blurred his vision. The weight of Margaret's trust, her secret, and their deepening friendship pressed against his heart. He pulled over briefly, unable to continue until he could see clearly again. "I'll make sure the world knows you, not just your title," he whispered into the quiet car, his voice thick with emotion. Autumn leaves danced in the crisp morning air as Michael unlocked the doors to Emma's Hope's new headquarters, a modest but welcoming storefront in downtown Maple Grove. The fresh paint still carried that new beginning smell, and the logo Emma designed herself, a simple heart formed by helping hands, gleamed on the front window. Inside, volunteers bustled about, arranging donated office furniture and setting up computer stations. The space hummed with purpose and possibility. Michael paused at the entrance, taking it all in. Just 6 weeks ago, this had been an empty building. Now it was becoming exactly what he'd dreamed of, a place where single parents could find support, job training, and most importantly, hope. "Dad!" Emma called from behind the reception desk. She waved a stack of papers. "We got 15 more volunteer applications this morning, and 3 more companies want to partner with us for job placements." Michael smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. At 16, she'd thrown herself into the foundation's work with remarkable dedication. Staying up late to perfect their website and create social media content, her eyes sparkled with the same light her mother's had when helping others. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," he said, hanging up his jacket. "But don't forget about your homework. Already done?" She grinned. "Besides, this is way more important than algebra." A young woman approached them, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Turner, the Channel 5 crew is setting up in the conference room. They'd like to start the interview in 20 minutes. Michael nodded, straightening his tie, a recent gift from Margaret. The national news station had reached out after their local story went viral, wanting to showcase Emma's Hope as part of their American Spirit series. Though still uncomfortable with attention, Michael had learned to accept it for the foundation's sake. The interview went better than he'd expected. The reporter, Sandra Chen, asked thoughtful questions about their mission and impact. Michael spoke from the heart about second chances and community support. Emma joined him halfway through, describing how the foundation had already helped 3 single parents find stable jobs. And what inspired the name Emma's? "Hope?" Sandra asked. Michael glanced at his daughter. "Well, Emma here never lost faith in me, even when I lost my job. She taught me that hope isn't just about wishing for better times, it's about believing in people enough to help them stand up again." The segment aired the following week during prime time. Phones started ringing off the hook immediately. Corporate donations poured in. Local businesses offered job training partnerships. Other communities reached out about starting their own chapters. Then came the president's endorsement. William Ellis himself appeared on national television, praising Emma's Hope as a shining example of American compassion in action. The foundation's website crashed from traffic. Michael hired 3 full-time staff members to handle the growing workload. They expanded their services to include childcare assistance and transportation support. Emma developed a mentoring program pairing experienced single parents with those just starting out. On the morning of the grand opening ceremony, Michael arrived early to find the sidewalk already packed with well-wishers. News vans lined the street. Volunteers handed out coffee and pastries to the growing crowd. Inside, Emma fussed with his tie. "You look perfect, Dad," she assured him. "Mom would be so proud." Michael hugged her tight, fighting back tears. "She'd be proud of both of us, sweetheart." At exactly 10 o'clock, they stepped outside to thunderous applause. Michael approached the podium, his hands trembling slightly. In the front row sat Margaret, elegant as always in a rose-colored suit, beaming up at him with maternal pride. The crowd fell silent as he began to speak. "6 months ago, I was just a dad trying to do the right thing on a rainy morning. I never imagined that one small act of kindness would lead to all this. But that's the thing about kindness. It grows. It multiplies. It spreads hope like wildfire." He gestured to the building behind him. Emma's hope isn't just about finding jobs. It's about remembering that we're all connected. That sometimes the person who needs help today might be the one offering help tomorrow. That no parent should have to choose between doing what's right and providing for their family. Tears welled in his eyes as he continued. "To everyone who believed in this dream, our volunteers, our donors, our amazing staff, thank you. To every single parent out there struggling to make ends meet, we see you. We're here for you. And most importantly," he caught Margaret's encouraging nod, "we believe in you." The applause that followed was deafening. Emma rushed to hug him as cameras flashed. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a delicate handkerchief, her smile radiant with joy and something deeper, a profound satisfaction in witnessing goodness multiply. The ribbon-cutting ceremony followed, with Michael and Emma sharing the giant scissors. As red and gold balloons soared into the autumn sky, Michael looked out at the hundreds of faces before him, all united in hope, all believing in the power of simple kindness to change lives. The glossy business card caught the fluorescent light as Trent Norris turned it between his fingers. "Senior investigative reporter," it proclaimed in bold letters. He sat in his cramped cubicle at the Daily Chronicle, surrounded by stacks of newspapers featuring Michael Turner's story. His editor's words still rang in his ears. "Find something fresh. Everyone's done the feel-good angle. Dig deeper." Trent pulled up Michael's social media profiles, sparse and barely used before the viral video. His employment history showed nothing remarkable. Mechanic, small business owner, delivery driver, everything seemed almost too ordinary. "Nobody's this clean," Trent muttered, clicking through public records. He'd built his career, exposing the skeletons in people's closets. The bigger they were, the harder they fell, and Michael Turner was becoming very big indeed. The phone rang. Trent answered immediately when he saw the caller ID. Logistics Solutions Incorporated. "Mr. Norris?" The voice was careful, measured. "This is Richard Keene. I understand you're looking into Michael Turner's background." Trent's fingers flew to his keyboard. "Yes, Mr. Keene. As his former supervisor, your perspective would be valuable." "Well," Keene cleared his throat, "I've been troubled by certain inconsistencies in Mr. Turner's story." "Go on." Trent's pulse quickened. Turner was always obsessed with getting ahead. He talked constantly about needing money for his daughter's college. The morning of the incident, he was acting strangely, checking his phone, looking around. Keene's voice dripped with insinuation, almost like he was waiting for something. Trent's fingers paused over the keys. "Are you suggesting the encounter was staged?" "All I know is that someone just happened to be filming at exactly the right moment, and now he's America's sweetheart, running a $1 million foundation." Keene chuckled darkly. "Quite convenient, wouldn't you say?" After hanging up, Trent dove into online forums. The comment sections under Michael's videos were mostly positive, but there was an undercurrent of skepticism. He started screenshotting the doubters. How did the president's mother just happen to be alone on that road? Notice how perfectly framed the video is? Wake up, people. This was obviously planned. The theory gained traction. Each share, each retweet added fuel to the fire. Trent crafted his first draft, careful to phrase everything as questions rather than accusations. The convenient hero, examining the Michael Turner phenomenon. At Emma's Hope headquarters, Margaret Ellis sat across from Michael in his modest office. her elegant hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. Despite her illness, her eyes remained sharp and knowing. "They're coming for you," she said softly. "I've seen it before, the vultures circling when someone rises too fast, shines too bright." Michael set down his own coffee, untouched. "But why? I never wanted any of this. I just stopped to help someone who needed it. Fame invites envy, dear friend." Margaret reached across the desk to pat his hand. "The brighter the light, the darker the shadows it casts. You must stand firm in truth." "The truth?" Michael's voice cracked slightly. "The truth is, I'm terrified. Emma's finally proud of me. The foundation is helping people. What if it all falls apart?" "Then we'll face it together," Margaret assured him, though her complexion seemed paler than usual. Truth has a way of prevailing. That evening, Michael sat alone in his living room, the TV's blue glow casting shadows on the wall. Emma was at a study group, and the house felt too quiet. The news anchor's voice cut through the silence. Tonight on Special Report, was America's kindest man a fraud? Sources close to Michael Turner suggest his viral act of kindness may have been an elaborate publicity stunt. Michael's hands trembled as he reached for the remote. The screen showed Trent Norris standing outside Emma's Hope, looking earnest and concerned. Questions are emerging about the timing and circumstances of Turner's famous roadside encounter. His former employer has come forward with troubling allegations. The remote slipped from Michael's fingers, clattering to the floor. On screen, Mr. Keene's familiar face appeared. Speaking with rehearsed sincerity, "In hindsight, there were red flags we should have noticed." Michael watched, frozen, as his simple act of kindness was twisted into something calculated and corrupt. His phone buzzed with incoming messages, supporters asking for explanations, reporters requesting comments, trolls spewing venom. The headline crawled across the bottom of the screen in bold letters. Was America's kindest man a fraud? His hands trembled as he picked up his phone, seeing missed calls from Margaret. The world he'd built on a single moment of compassion seemed to be crumbling around him. And for the first time since that rainy morning, Michael Turner questioned whether stopping to help had been worth the cost. The morning sun cast long shadows across Michael's desk as he stared at his computer screen, his coffee growing cold beside him. The ceramic mug bore Emma's handprint from when she was 8, a Mother's Day gift she'd made for Sarah that Michael couldn't bear to put away. Now it seemed to mock him as he watched his world collapse one email at a time. "We regret to inform you, due to recent allegations, until this matter is resolved." Each message arrived like hammer blows. The corporate language cold and clinical. Another sponsor pulling their support from Emma's Hope. Another partnership dissolved. Another bridge burned. The foundation's bank account, once flush with donations that had poured in after the White House ceremony, would soon run dry. Michael's hands trembled as he clicked through the withdrawals. 50,000 here, 100,000 there. Numbers that had once represented hope for struggling families now vanished like morning mist, leaving behind only the bitter taste of broken promises. He rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar throb of a headache building. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence, each second marking another moment of his reputation bleeding away. Outside, he could hear the distant hum of traffic, people going about their normal lives while his crumbled into dust. His phone buzzed against the wooden desk. A text from Emma. "Dad, can you pick me up, please?" Michael glanced at the clock. It wasn't even noon yet. His stomach dropped. Emma never left school early. She was too dedicated to her studies, too proud of her perfect attendance record. Something was wrong. He grabbed his keys with shaking fingers, leaving the computer screen filled with more rejection emails he couldn't bear to read. The drive to the high school felt endless, every red light stretching into eternity. When he finally pulled up to the brick building where Emma had once felt safe, she sat alone on the concrete steps like a bird with broken wings. Her backpack lay beside her, and her shoulders hunched forward in defeat. She climbed into the passenger seat without a word, her usual cheerful greeting nowhere to be found. Up close, Michael could see the telltale signs, red-rimmed eyes, blotchy cheeks, the way she wouldn't meet his gaze. His heart clenched. "What happened, sweetheart?" Emma's voice came out as barely a whisper. "They wrote things in my locker. Someone made memes about us awful ones, posted them all over social media." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "They're saying we're thieves, that we fooled everyone, that we're just white trash trying to get rich off other people's sympathy." Her voice cracked on the last words, and Michael felt something fierce and protective surge through his chest. His little girl, who had never hurt anyone, who volunteered at the animal shelter and tutored struggling classmates, was paying for his moment of kindness. Tyler Jensen told everyone his dad lost his job because he invested in our foundation, Emma continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. And Sarah Martinez said her mom called me a liar. They all believe it, Dad. Even the teachers are looking at me funny. Michael gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, imagining those cruel teenagers surrounding his daughter like vultures. The girl who had stood by him through everything, her mother's death, the lean years, the sudden fame, now faced the cruelest judgment of all, that of her peers. As they approached their house, Michael's heart sank further. 3 news vans idled at the curb like mechanical vultures, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky. Reporters lounged against their vehicles, perking up the moment they spotted Michael's truck. He recognized some of their faces from the earlier, kinder interviews. Now they wore the hungry expressions of predators scenting blood. The moment Michael parked in his driveway, they surged forward like a pack of wolves. Microphones and cameras thrust through the barely open car windows before he could react. Mr. Turner, how do you respond to allegations that you orchestrated this entire scheme? Is it true that you and the president's mother planned this from the beginning? What about the evidence that suggests you knew who she was, sir? What do you say to the families who donated their savings? The voices blended into an incomprehensible roar of accusation and demand. Michael shielded Emma with his body, one arm around her shoulders as he guided her toward the front door. She pressed against him, trembling like a leaf in a storm. The reporters followed them right up to the porch, their equipment creating a forest of metal and plastic around the simple home where Michael had once felt safe. Inside, the sanctuary felt violated. The answering machine blinked angrily, 37 messages, each one likely another nail in the coffin of his reputation. Through the front window, camera flashes sparked like lightning against the glass. Michael pulled the curtains closed, but the clicking and whirring continued outside, relentless as summer cicadas. The house phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the chaos. Michael almost ignored it. He'd had enough voices for one day, but when he saw Margaret's number on the caller ID, he snatched up the receiver. Margaret, my dear friend. Her voice sounded weaker than usual, paper-thin and fragile. In the background, he could hear the soft beeping of hospital machines and the hushed voices of medical staff. The sound sent ice through his veins. I saw the news. Are you and Emma all right? Michael sank into his worn recliner, the same chair where he'd held Emma during thunderstorms, where he dozed while she did homework at his feet. Now it felt like the only solid thing in a world gone mad. I don't know what to do, Margaret, he admitted, his voice breaking. Everything's falling apart. The foundation is ruined. Emma can't even go to school. I'm not strong enough for this. Listen to me carefully, Margaret said, her voice gaining strength despite her obvious fatigue. Remember Psalm 27, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life, of whom shall I be afraid?" David wrote those words when he faced his enemies, when the world seemed against him. She paused, and Michael could hear her shallow breathing. They attacked our Lord with false accusations too, Michael. Remember that. They called him names, spread lies, turned the crowds against him. But the truth has a way of rising to the surface. Hold fast to what you know is true about yourself. Before Michael could respond, Emma's scream shattered the afternoon quiet. Sharp and terrified, it came from somewhere outside the house. Michael dropped the phone without another word and ran toward the sound, his heart hammering against his ribs. He threw open the front door to find Emma standing frozen in the driveway, her hands pressed to her mouth in horror. Red spray paint marred their white vinyl siding in angry, dripping letters. Liar in bold strokes that reminded Michael of blood. Below it, in smaller letters, scammer. And at the bottom, in a child's crude handwriting, get out. But the words weren't the worst of it. The roses, Sarah's roses that she'd planted the spring before she got sick, that Michael had tended faithfully for 5 years, lay crushed and scattered across the lawn. Their delicate petals looked like drops of blood against the green grass, and their broken stems jutted from the earth like bones. Something broke inside Michael's chest. The pressure that had been building for days suddenly erupted, crushing down on him with the weight of a collapsed building. His vision blurred at the edges, and the world seemed to tilt sideways. He couldn't catch his breath. His legs felt like water. Dad? Emma's voice seemed to come from very far away, distorted and strange. Dad! He tried to answer, tried to tell her he was fine, but darkness was creeping in from all sides. The last thing he remembered was the rough texture of the doorframe against his palm as he tried to steady himself, and Emma's terrified face swimming in and out of focus. He woke to the sharp smell of antiseptic and the steady rhythm of beeping monitors. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh white light. A hospital room small and sterile, with pale green walls and a window that looked out over the parking lot. For a moment, he couldn't remember how he'd gotten there. Then it all came rushing back. The emails, the reporters, the spray paint, Emma's scream, "Dad?" Emma sat in an uncomfortable-looking chair beside his bed, her math textbook open on her lap but clearly forgotten. Her eyes were red from crying, but she managed a shaky smile when she saw him looking at her. "You scared me." A doctor entered, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She explained terms like anxiety attack and stress-induced collapse in gentle but clinical language. His body had simply reached its breaking point, she said. 24 hours for observation, just to be safe. Rest and quiet, she prescribed, as if those were luxuries he could afford. That night, lying in the narrow hospital bed with Emma curled up beside him like she used to do as a little girl after nightmares, Michael stared at the ceiling tiles and counted them to keep his mind from racing. The weight of it all, the accusations, the lost funding, the cruel words painted on his home, Margaret's failing health pressed down on his chest like a stone. Through the thin hospital walls, he could hear the sounds of other people's crises, a baby crying, someone coughing, the soft murmur of late-night conversations between doctors. The world kept spinning, kept breaking and healing and breaking again, while he lay there wondering how it had all gone so wrong. "Maybe," he whispered into the darkness, the words tasting like ashes in his mouth, "I should have just driven past that day. Maybe I should have minded my own business." Emma's body went rigid beside him. She lifted her head from his shoulder, and in the dim light filtering through the window blinds, he could see tears streaming down her face. "Dad, no," she pleaded, her voice thick with emotion. "Please don't say that. Please, don't even think it." Her shoulders shook as she cried deep, silent sobs that seemed to come from the very center of her being. Michael felt his own tears fall for the first time since the whole nightmare had begun, hot and bitter against his cheeks. He pulled his daughter closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. Outside, through the hospital window, he could see the distant glow of camera flashes in the parking lot below. Even here, even in this place of healing, they waited like hungry wolves for another shot of America's fallen hero. The thought filled him with a weariness so deep it seemed to reach his very bones. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the feeling of that rainy morning when helping Margaret had seemed like the most natural thing in the world. But that memory felt like it belonged to someone else, someone braver and better than the broken man lying in this hospital bed, holding his weeping daughter while his world crumbled outside. The autumn wind whipped through the hospital parking lot as Michael pulled into a visitor space. Dried leaves skittered across the pavement like nervous whispers. He sat in his old pickup truck for a long moment, gathering his strength. The hospice wing loomed ahead, its windows reflecting the gray afternoon light. Inside, the hall smelled of disinfectant and old flowers. A nurse recognized him and offered a gentle smile. "She's been asking for you," she said softly. "She's had a difficult morning." Michael's footsteps echoed in the quiet corridor. Room 317. He paused at the doorway, his heart aching at the sight before him. Margaret Ellis, once so elegant and commanding, now seemed small against the white hospital pillows. Medical equipment beeped softly around her, but when she opened her eyes and saw him, her familiar warm smile lit up her tired face. "Michael," she breathed. "My roadside angel." He moved to her bedside, taking her fragile hand in his. "I came as soon as I could. Sit with me." She patted the chair beside her bed. "These old bones won't keep me company much longer." Michael's throat tightened. "Don't talk like that." "Oh, hush," she said with a trace of her old spirit. "We both know why I'm here, and I'm glad you came. There's something I need to tell you." He leaned closer as her voice grew softer. The late afternoon sun filtered through the window blinds, casting stripes of light across her bed. "You know," she began, "everyone keeps talking about how lucky I was that day. The president's mother, stranded in the rain, saved by a good Samaritan." She squeezed his hand. "But they've got it all wrong." Michael started to speak, but she shook her head. "Let me finish," You didn't stop for who I was. You stopped because of who you are." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "That's what makes you special, Michael, not the medals or the news stories or any of it. You're the man who stops to help, even when it costs him everything." "Fat lot of good it's done me," Michael said quietly, thinking of the cruel headlines, the vandalized house, Emma's tears. "Don't you dare." Margaret's voice gained strength. "Don't let them make you doubt yourself. The world needs more people like you, not fewer." She shifted in her bed, wincing slightly. "Hand me that envelope from my nightstand, would you?" Michael reached over and picked up a cream-colored envelope, heavy with expensive paper. The Ellis family crest was pressed into red wax on the seal. "This is for you," she said, "but don't open it now. Save it for when you've forgotten who you are. When the world has made you doubt everything you believe in." She pressed it into his hands. "Promise me, I promise," he whispered. Margaret's eyes grew distant for a moment. "Would you pray with me, Michael? Like we used to in my garden?" He nodded, unable to speak. They bowed their heads together, his rough worker's hands gentle around her delicate fingers. "Dear Lord," Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper, "thank you for sending me an angel that rainy morning. Thank you for showing me that goodness still exists in this world. Watch over Michael and Emma. Give them strength when the world is cruel. And help them remember that doing what's right is always worth the cost." Her voice trailed off as she drifted to sleep, her breathing steady and peaceful. Michael sat there for a long while, watching the shadows lengthen across the room. Finally, he stood, tucking the envelope carefully into his jacket pocket. At the door, he turned back for one last look. Margaret looked serene in the fading light, as if she'd already found her peace with whatever came next. The drive home was silent, his thoughts too heavy for even the radio. The envelope seemed to burn in his pocket. As he pulled into his driveway, his phone rang. The hospital's number flashed on the screen. Michael answered, his hand trembling slightly. The nurse's voice was gentle but clear. "Mr. Turner, I'm so sorry. Mrs. Ellis passed away a few minutes ago." The morning sun cast long shadows through Michael's living room as the TV flickered with nonstop coverage of Margaret Ellis's passing. Every channel showed the same images: Margaret's radiant smile at state dinners, her gentle presence at charity events, and candid moments with her son, the president. The headline, "Nation Mourns Margaret Ellis, the Heart of America," scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Michael sat in his worn armchair, the sealed letter from Margaret resting heavily in his hands. Its cream-colored envelope felt thick and expensive, the presidential seal pressed into deep red wax. His fingers traced the elegant cursive of his name on the front, but he couldn't bring himself to break the seal. In her final years, Margaret Ellis remained a beacon of grace and wisdom, a news anchor declared. Her unexpected friendship with Michael Turner, the controversial Good Samaritan, marked her last public appearance before retiring to private life due to illness. Michael's jaw tightened at the word controversial. He reached for the remote and muted the TV, but the images continued to play. Photos of Margaret at the White House ceremony where he'd received his medal, footage of her standing beside him at the opening of Emma's Hope. Each memory felt like a knife twisting in his chest. His phone buzzed again, another reporter seeking comment. He'd stopped answering days ago. The stack of newspapers on his coffee table told the story. Questions surround Turner as nation grieves. Margaret Ellis's final days, what really happened, and White House silent on Turner controversy. Emma came downstairs, her school backpack slung over one shoulder. She paused, watching her father stare at the silent TV screen. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually neat shirt was wrinkled. "Dad?" she said softly. "You haven't slept, have you?" Michael managed a weak smile. "Just watching the news, sweetheart. They're showing the same things over and over." Emma sat on the arm of his chair. "She wouldn't want you to torture yourself like this." A breaking news banner flashed across the screen. The White House had announced that President Ellis would deliver a televised eulogy for his mother the following evening. Michael's stomach clenched. Would the president distance himself now? Denounce him to protect his mother's memory? "The foundation called again," Emma said carefully. 3 more donors pulled out this morning." Michael nodded numbly. Emma's hope was crumbling. The charity that had helped dozens of struggling single parents find work was now tainted by suspicion. Last week, someone had spray-painted fraud across their office windows. "Why won't you open it?" Emma pointed to the letter. "She wanted you to read it." "She said to open it when I'd forgotten who I am," Michael replied, his voice rough. "I haven't forgotten. I know exactly who I am, the man who's being called an opportunist, a con artist who took advantage of a dying woman's kindness. That's not true. Emma's voice cracked. Margaret knew you better than anyone except me. She believed in you until the end. Michael's phone buzzed again. This time it was Trent Norris, the journalist who'd started the investigation into Michael's past. His latest article suggested that Michael had somehow orchestrated the entire roadside incident, claiming anonymous sources confirmed he'd known Margaret's identity beforehand. "Please, Dad," Emma pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "Open the letter. Whatever she wrote, you need to hear it now." Michael looked at his daughter, so much like her mother, so full of faith in him. Then he glanced at the TV, where Margaret's kind face filled the screen. She was wearing her favorite pearl necklace, speaking at some charity event years ago. Her eyes sparkled with the same warmth they'd had that rainy morning when he'd stopped to help her. With trembling fingers, he broke the wax seal. The envelope contained several pages of Margaret's elegant handwriting. As he unfolded them, a small key fell into his lap. "Read it out loud," Emma whispered, squeezing his shoulder. Michael cleared his throat and began, "My dearest Michael, if you're reading this, I've already gone home to the Lord, and you're doubting everything about yourself. I know you too well, my friend. You're probably sitting in that old armchair of yours, watching the news and believing all the cruel things they're saying. Stop that right now. You see, I've lived long enough to know that the truth always comes with a price. The moment you stopped to help me that morning, I saw something rare in this world. Pure, unselfish goodness. You didn't know who I was. You didn't want anything in return. You simply saw someone in need and chose to help, even though it cost you everything. That's why they're attacking you now. Real goodness makes some people uncomfortable. It holds up a mirror to their own choices, and they don't like what they see." Michael's voice broke. Emma wrapped her arms around him, and together they sat in silence as the morning light grew stronger, while on the TV, images of Margaret's life continued to play in an endless loop, telling the story of a remarkable woman who had touched countless lives, including theirs, with her grace, wisdom, and unwavering faith in the goodness of others. The letter trembled in Michael's hands, its remaining pages still unread, the mysterious key cool against his palm. For the first time since Margaret's passing, he felt something stir in his heart. Not quite hope, but perhaps its quiet beginning. Michael sat at his kitchen table, the pale morning light filtering through the curtains. The sealed letter from Margaret lay before him, its cream-colored envelope bearing her elegant handwriting. His fingers trembled as he traced the Ellis family crest pressed into the red wax seal. Emma stood quietly behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Dad," she whispered, "I think it's time." Taking a deep breath, Michael carefully broke the seal and unfolded 3 pages of delicate stationery covered in Margaret's flowing script. The paper carried a hint of her favorite lavender perfume. "My dearest Michael," he read aloud, his voice catching. "By the time you read this, I will have gone home to be with the Lord. Please don't mourn too deeply. I've lived a full life, blessed beyond measure. But I need to tell you something important, something I've observed since that rainy morning when you stopped to help a stranger. You see, Michael, in my position, I've met thousands of people, politicians, celebrities, wealthy donors, all eager to impress the president's mother. Their kindness always came with expectations. But you didn't know who I was. You stopped simply because you saw someone in need. In that moment, you reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. That pure, simple goodness still exists in this world. I've watched you struggle with the attention, the praise, and now the cruel accusations. My heart aches knowing that your beautiful act of kindness has brought you such pain. But remember this, truth needs no defense, it endures. Those who twist your story for their own gain will fade away, but the reality of what you did that morning remains unchanged." Michael paused, wiping his eyes. Emma squeezed his shoulder, and he continued reading. "I'm including with this letter my personal testimony, properly notarized, detailing exactly what happened that morning. I've also arranged for my personal driver, who picked me up after you left, to corroborate every detail. The truth will come out, Michael. But that's not why I'm writing this. I'm writing because I need you to understand something. You didn't just change a tire that morning, you changed me. After losing my husband, I'd grown cynical about humanity. I'd withdrawn from public life, convinced that genuine kindness had vanished from our world. But you proved me wrong. The foundation you built, Emma's hope, isn't just about finding jobs for single parents. It's about showing people that one small act of kindness can ripple outward, touching countless lives. Don't let them steal that truth from you. Your daughter Emma, once, told me that you still question whether stopping that morning was worth losing your job. Let me be clear. Your act of kindness gave me back my faith in humanity. It reminded me, and through me, reminded this entire nation that character isn't measured by titles or bank accounts, but by the choices we make when no one's watching. Or at least, when we think no one's watching. Michael's hand shook as he turned to the final page. They'll ask you to attend my memorial service. I know you'll hesitate, worried about the whispers and stares. Go anyway. Hold your head high. You don't need to defend yourself. The truth of who you are shines through in every quiet act of kindness you perform. Remember me not as the president's mother, but as the old woman whose faith you restored on a rainy morning. And know that wherever I am now, I'm smiling down on you with all the pride of a mother who has seen her child choose right over easy. With eternal gratitude and love, Margaret Michael lowered the letter, tears streaming down his face. Emma wrapped her arms around him, and father and daughter held each other as the morning light grew stronger. After a long moment, Michael straightened up and wiped his eyes. He carefully folded the letter and looked at the formal testimony Margaret had enclosed. His hands steadied as he made his decision. Despite everything, the accusations, the stares, the whispers, he would attend her memorial. He owed her that much. More than that, he needed to honor the woman who had become not just his defender, but his friend. "Dad?" Emma asked softly, seeing the resolve in his eyes. "We're going," he said quietly. "Margaret believed in me until the end. The least I can do is stand up and honor her memory." He placed the letter back in its envelope, handling it with the reverence of a precious gift. Because that's what it was. Margaret's final gift to him wasn't just his vindication. It was the reminder that true kindness, once given, could never really be taken away. The National Cathedral's towering spires pierced the morning mist, their Gothic grandeur a fitting tribute to Margaret Ellis's remarkable life. Inside, white lilies draped every surface, their sweet perfume filling the vast space. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the sea of mourners who had come to pay their respects. Michael Turner stood at the back of the cathedral, his dark suit freshly pressed but slightly worn at the edges. Emma, beautiful in a simple black dress, held his arm. They hadn't planned to come to the front, content to remain anonymous among the hundreds of dignitaries, politicians, and citizens who filled the pews. "Maybe we should find seats in the back," Michael whispered to Emma, feeling out of place among the well-dressed crowd. His daughter squeezed his arm but said nothing. The organ's deep notes resonated through the cathedral as the service began. Michael watched as the president's security detail moved efficiently through the aisles, their earpieces glinting in the filtered light. President William Ellis stood at the front, his shoulders straight but heavy with grief, greeting those who had come to honor his mother. Suddenly, the president's gaze swept across the crowd and locked onto Michael. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by a warm smile that transformed his features from those of a statesman to those of a grieving son seeking comfort in a friend's presence. President Ellis whispered something to his chief of staff, who quickly made his way through the crowd toward Michael and Emma. "Mr. Turner," the man said quietly, "the president requests that you and your daughter join the family in the front pew." Michael started to protest, but Emma tugged gently at his sleeve. "Dad," she whispered, "Margaret would want us there." As they followed the chief of staff down the center aisle, Michael felt hundreds of eyes upon them. Some faces showed recognition, others confusion, and a few displayed the skepticism that had haunted him since the accusations began. But when they reached the front, President Ellis stepped forward and embraced Michael like a brother. "Mother would be so pleased. You're here," the president said, his voice thick with emotion. "Please, sit with us." The first hour of the service passed in a blur of hymns and remembrances. Distinguished speakers shared stories of Margaret's charitable works, her dedication to education, and her role as a presidential mother. But it was when President Ellis stood to deliver the eulogy that the cathedral fell into complete silence. "My mother," the president began, his voice steady despite his visible emotion, "taught me that true character isn't measured by titles or achievements, but by how we treat others when no one is watching." He paused, drawing a familiar cream-colored envelope from his jacket pocket. "Or at least, when we think no one is watching." Michael's heart skipped a beat as he recognized Margaret's letter, identical to the one he'd received. In her final days, the president continued, my mother wrote several letters. One was to a man whose simple act of kindness touched her deeply. With his permission, I'd like to share her words with you today. Michael hadn't known the president had his own letter from Margaret. He felt Emma's hand slip into his as President Ellis began to read. My dearest William, I need to tell you about the day that restored my faith in humanity. It wasn't a day of grand gestures or political victories. It was a rainy morning when my tire went flat on that country road. I was cold, scared, and feeling every one of my years. Cars passed by. Expensive cars, comfortable cars, cars driven by people who surely saw an old woman in distress. But one man stopped. He didn't know who I was. He was running late for work, his clothes were threadbare, and he had every reason to drive past like all the others. That man was Michael Turner. He changed my tire in the pouring rain, ruining his only good work shirt. He refused payment, spoke to me with kindness, and went on his way, straight to losing his job because of his decision to help me. When the media turned against him, questioning his motives and character, he never once used my name or position to defend himself. He protected my privacy even as his own life fell apart. William, in all your years of public service, remember this. True nobility isn't found in marble halls or behind oak desks. It lives in the hearts of people like Michael Turner, who choose right over easy, who serve without seeking reward, who remain gentle even when the world turns harsh. The president looked up from the letter, his eyes glistening. My mother's last request was that I share this truth with the nation. Michael Turner never sought fame or reward. He simply helped an old woman on a rainy day, and in doing so he reminded my mother, and now reminds all of us, that goodness still exists in its purest form. The cathedral erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, turning to look at Michael, who remained seated, tears streaming down his face. Emma stood beside him, proud and tall, her own eyes bright with emotion. The applause continued, swelling through the vast space, echoing off ancient stones and stained glass. Michael felt the weight of accusations and doubt lifting from his shoulders, replaced by something lighter, not pride, but peace. Margaret's final gift hadn't been vindication. It had been the reminder that truth, in its own time, finds its way to light. As the sound of clapping hands filled the cathedral, Michael wept quietly, overwhelmed by the moment. He thought of Margaret's smile, her wisdom, her quiet strength. In helping her that rainy morning, he had found not just a friend, but a champion of truth. Through her words, even after her passing, she had helped him one final time. He sat in the warm light of the cathedral, surrounded by the sweet scent of lilies and the sound of hundreds of people standing in support, and felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. Emma's hand remained firmly in his, anchoring him in the moment as tears of gratitude and release flowed freely down his cheeks. The morning sun streamed through Michael's kitchen window as he sipped his coffee, trying to ignore the TV news playing in the background. Emma sat across from him, picking at her breakfast when the news anchor's tone suddenly changed. Breaking news this morning, the anchor announced, her expression serious. In a stunning development, major media outlets are issuing formal retractions regarding their coverage of Michael Turner, the man who helped the late Margaret Ellis. The anchor paused, shuffling papers. New evidence has emerged showing a coordinated effort to discredit Mr. Turner's act of kindness. Michael's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. Emma grabbed the remote and turned up the volume. Documents obtained by our investigative team reveal that Superior Logistics Company deliberately altered attendance records and delivery logs to make it appear that Mr. Turner had a history of tardiness and unreliability. The screen split to show security camera footage from that rainy morning, time-stamped and clear. There was Michael's truck, right where he said it had been, proving his timeline had been accurate all along. "Dad," Emma whispered, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. His phone began buzzing with notifications. First one major network, then another and another issued formal apologies. Social media exploded with hashtags supporting him. Number Turner Truth and number Justice for Michael Turner trended nationwide. The evidence against Superior Logistics was damning. Internal emails showed Mr. Keene had orchestrated a campaign to paint Michael as an opportunist who had engineered the entire incident for publicity. But the company's own security logs betrayed them. Every document they'd used against Michael had been altered after the fact. By mid-morning, Superior Logistics Corporate Headquarters issued an emergency press release. Michael watched as their CEO appeared on screen, ashen-faced and contrite. "We are deeply disturbed by the actions taken by certain individuals within our company," the CEO stated. "The deliberate falsification of records to discredit Mr. Turner is contrary to everything our company stands for. We have accepted the immediate resignation of Richard Keene and will be conducting a thorough internal investigation." The camera cut to Mr. Keene being escorted from the building, his face hidden behind a newspaper. The man who had once towered over Michael with such authority now looked small and defeated. Emma's phone chimed with message after message from classmates who had once turned their backs on her. "Look at this, Dad," she said, showing him the screen. "Everyone's apologizing." Local news vans began appearing on their street. This time, instead of hostile questions, reporters spoke of vindication and justice. The morning shows that had dropped Michael from their schedules now begged for exclusive interviews. "Mr. Turner," one reporter called out as Michael stepped onto his porch to collect the mail, "how does it feel to be vindicated?" Michael paused, considering his words carefully. "Truth doesn't need defending," he said quietly, remembering Margaret's letter. "It just needs time to come to light." By afternoon, the president himself issued a statement. Margaret always saw the good in people. She saw it in Michael Turner when he stopped to help her that day. She never doubted him, and neither did I. Let this be a lesson about rushing to judgment and the power of truth to prevail. The foundation's phone lines lit up with donors wanting to reinstate their support. Emma's hope would survive, stronger now for having weathered the storm. As the sun began to set, Michael's neighbor Mrs. Chen came, over with a casserole and tears in her eyes. "I should have known better," she said, hugging him tight. "We all should have." More neighbors followed, bringing food and apologies. The local flower shop delivered arrangement after arrangement, each with cards expressing remorse and support. Soon, Michael's modest porch disappeared under a garden of roses, lilies, and daisies, nature's own testimony to restored faith. "I can barely see the front door." Emma laughed, trying to make a path through the flowers. Michael picked up one of the hundreds of letters that had arrived. The handwriting was shaky, elderly. "Dear Mr. Turner, I'm just a grandmother from Kansas, but I want you to know I never believed the lies. You remind me that goodness still exists in this world. Thank you for not letting them break your spirit." Another card read, "To the man who showed us what integrity looks like, I'm teaching my children about you in our home. Thank you for standing firm in the truth." The flowers kept coming as the sun set, turning Michael's porch into a fragrant testimony to restored faith. Each bloom seemed to whisper Margaret's words. "Truth needs no defense. It endures." Michael stood among the flowers, holding Emma close, surrounded by the physical proof that light eventually breaks through even the darkest clouds. The sweet scent of apology and redemption filled the air as father and daughter read card after card, each one helping to heal the wounds of doubt and betrayal. "She knew," Emma said softly. "Margaret knew this would happen. That's why she left you that letter." Michael nodded, remembering Margaret's wise eyes and gentle smile. The flowers around them caught the last rays of sunlight, glowing like beacons of hope in the gathering dusk. Truth had prevailed, just as she had promised it would. Sunlight poured through the newly cleaned windows of Emma's Hope headquarters. The small office space, which had sat empty during the darkest days of the scandal, now hummed with activity. Volunteers bustled about, answering phones and sorting through stacks of donation checks that had arrived over the past week. Michael stood in the doorway of his office, watching in quiet amazement. The sight of so many people working together, believing in his vision again, made his chest tight with emotion. A box of fresh supplies sat by his feet, pens, paper, and new folders for client files. On top lay a handwritten note, "We always believed in you." Emma worked at the front desk, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she updated their database. Her face glowed with purpose, and Michael couldn't help but notice how much she looked like her mother when she smiled that way. She'd grown so much through all of this, not just taller, but stronger inside. "Dad," she called out, waving a printout. "We just got another major donation. The Henderson Foundation wants to match all contributions for the next 3 months." Michael nodded, still taking it all in. The wall behind Emma displayed their new logo, freshly painted in warm blues and golds. Below it, in elegant script, were the words that had guided his life. "Do what's right, not what's easy." The community room down the hall was filling up for today's special event. They'd invited all their clients, single parents struggling to find work, along with local business leaders and supporters. Emma had insisted on giving a speech, and Michael couldn't say no. She'd earned this moment. At precisely noon, Emma stood at the podium. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, but her voice rang clear and strong. 6 months ago, she began, my dad stopped to help a stranger on a rainy morning. He lost his job for it. We almost lost everything. She paused, looking directly at the audience. But that act of kindness changed more than just our lives. It showed us all that faith matters, that doing the right thing matters. Michael watched from the back of the red room, his heart swelling with pride. The crowd sat transfixed as Emma continued. When people turned against us, when lies seemed stronger than truth, we held on to something my mom used to say. Faith isn't faith until it's all you're holding on to. Her voice wavered slightly. Margaret Ellis taught us the same thing. She showed us that one person's goodness can light up the darkness for everyone else. In the audience, a young single mother wiped away tears. Next to her, her little boy clutched a new backpack, one of hundreds Emma's Hope had donated for the back-to-school program. Today, Emma continued, her confidence growing. We're not just reopening our doors, we're opening our hearts wider. Every person who walks through those doors is family now. Every story matters. Every act of kindness ripples out and touches more lives than we can count. The applause was immediate and heartfelt. Michael noticed several business owners nodding, their checkbooks already out. But more importantly, he saw hope in the eyes of the parents they served. The same hope he'd once needed himself. As Emma stepped down from the podium, volunteers began leading tours of the expanded facility, the computer lab where they taught job skills, the children's area where kids could safely play while their parents interviewed, the career closet full of donated professional clothing. Each room represented another chance for someone to rebuild their life. Michael worked his way through the crowd, accepting handshakes and quiet apologies from those who had doubted him. He didn't hold grudges. Margaret had taught him that grace was stronger than bitterness. By late afternoon, the excitement had settled into purposeful activity. New clients filled out intake forms, while volunteers helped others update resumes. The phones kept ringing with more offers of support, and Emma's inbox overflowed with volunteer applications. In a quiet moment between meetings, Michael slipped into his office and closed the door. On his desk sat a silver frame holding a photo of Margaret in her garden. She was smiling, that knowing smile of hers, the one that seemed to see right through to your soul. We did it, he whispered, touching the frame gently. The sunlight caught the glass, making her image glow softly. In that moment, he could almost hear her voice. No, dear friend, you did it. You stayed true to who you are. The sound of laughter filtered through his door, Emma showing another group of visitors around. Michael smiled, knowing Margaret would have loved seeing this. The foundation wasn't just about finding jobs anymore. It had become a place where kindness multiplied, where people remembered how to believe in each other again. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Turner, we've got another group of volunteers here to help with the resume workshop. Coming, he called back, standing up. He gave Margaret's photo one last glance before heading out to greet the newcomers. The foundation's new motto caught his eye as he passed through the doorway. Do what's right, not what's easy. These words weren't just painted on a wall anymore. They lived in the hearts of everyone who walked through these doors, a testament to the power of one simple choice on a rainy morning. Every day, that choice continued to change lives, creating ripples of hope that spread further than Michael could have ever imagined. The autumn breeze rustled through the maple trees lining Cedar Street as Michael Turner pulled into his driveway. His old pickup truck, now sporting a fresh coat of blue paint courtesy of Emma's weekend project, settled into its familiar spot. The Emma's Hope magnetic sign on the door caught the late afternoon sun, a quiet reminder of how far they'd come. Inside their modest home, Michael hung his jacket by the door and smiled at the stack of unopened mail on the kitchen counter. Most were interview requests from major networks and publishers, wanting to tell his story. They'd been arriving steadily for months now, but Michael had learned to let them be. Fame had taught him its lessons, and he'd chosen a different path. Dad? Emma called from upstairs. Did you remember to pick up the ingredients? Everything but the nutmeg, he replied, unpacking grocery bags. Mrs. Chin at the market says hello, by the way. She's still grateful for fixing her delivery van last weekend. The kitchen counter was soon covered with flour, butter, and fresh apples, all the makings of Margaret's famous pie recipe. The handwritten card, now laminated to protect it from cooking spills, held pride of place on their recipe board. Michael ran his finger over the elegant script, remembering Margaret's laugh when she'd insisted on sharing her secret ingredient, a pinch of patience. Dear friend. Emma bounded down the stairs, her college acceptance letter clutched in her hand. She'd taken to carrying it everywhere these past few weeks, as if making sure it was still real. The full scholarship to State University had arrived last month, along with a personal note from the dean praising her essay about resilience and family. The soup kitchen called, she said, tying on an apron. They need extra hands tomorrow morning. I told them we'd both be there. Michael nodded, measuring flour into a bowl. These quiet acts of service had become their weekend ritual. No cameras, no speeches, no spotlight, just showing up where they were needed. Last weekend, it was helping Mr. Rodriguez, a single father of 3, move into his new apartment. The weekend before, they'd spent Sunday afternoon teaching basic car maintenance to a group of single mothers. You know, Emma said, carefully peeling apples. Channel 7 called again. They want to do a special about Where Are They Now stories. Said we'd be perfect for their season finale. Michael chuckled, his hands working the pie dough with practiced ease. And what did you tell them? Same thing you always say, that we're just regular folks trying to do some good. She grinned. Though they did offer to fly us first class this time. Fancy, Michael replied with a wink, but I prefer keeping our feet on the ground. They worked in comfortable silence, the familiar rhythm of baking filling their kitchen with warmth. Through the window, Michael could see their neighbor, Mrs. Watson, walking past with her groceries. He made a mental note to check on her furnace before winter set in. She'd mentioned it was making strange noises. The pie was just going into the oven when Emma pulled out her graduation cap and gown from its protective bag. The ceremony was next week, but she'd insisted on trying everything on one more time. The deep blue fabric caught the light, making the honor cords stand out brilliantly against it. Mom would have loved this, she said softly, smoothing the material. Michael wrapped an arm around her shoulders. She'd be so proud of you, sweetheart. Not just for the grades, but for who you've become. Emma leaned into his embrace. I learned from the best, Dad. You know, when everything was falling apart last year, I never once saw you bitter or angry. You just kept helping people. Well, Michael said, checking the pie through the oven window, someone very wise once told me that truth needs no defense. It endures. He smiled, thinking of Margaret's letter, now framed in his bedroom. She was right about that, wasn't she? The timer chimed, and Michael carefully pulled out the golden brown pie, its aroma filling the kitchen with memories. As it cooled on the windowsill, father and daughter sat at their small kitchen table, sharing quiet conversation about graduation plans and Emma's upcoming freshman orientation. No reporters called that evening. No cameras flashed outside their windows. Just a father and daughter, celebrating life's simple victories over homemade pie and memories of the friend who'd taught them both about grace under pressure. The recipe card sat propped against the sugar bowl, Margaret's elegant handwriting catching the evening light. Remember, dears, the secret ingredient isn't in the spices. It's in the sharing. Emma cut 2 generous slices, the steam rising with familiar sweetness. To Margaret, she said softly, raising her fork. To Margaret, Michael echoed, his heart full of gratitude for the friend who'd shown them that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness were the ones no one ever saw. The Sunday evening air held that perfect warmth that comes after a late summer rain. Michael Turner guided his truck along the winding road home from Maple Grove Community Church, where he'd just finished helping with the youth group dinner. The setting sun painted streaks of amber across scattered clouds, and the wet asphalt gleamed like polished stone. He hummed along to an old hymn on the radio, thinking about Emma's upcoming college move-in day next month. His daughter had grown into such a remarkable young woman. Even with all the scholarship papers signed and the dorm room assigned, part of him still couldn't believe they'd made it through the storms of the past year. The familiar curve of Route 27 stretched before him, bordered by wild Queen Anne's lace and black-eyed Susans. Michael's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel as he approached the exact spot where, not so long ago, he'd stopped to help Margaret. The memory no longer brought pain, just a warm gratitude that made his heart feel full. As if history itself had staged a replay, Michael spotted a figure up ahead. A young man in his early 20s stood beside a sedan with its hood up, waving apologetically at passing cars. Steam rose from the engine in the golden evening light. Without a moment's hesitation, Michael clicked on his turn signal and eased onto the shoulder. The gravel crunched beneath his tires as he pulled up behind the stranded vehicle. In his rearview mirror, he watched. Other cars zipped past, just as they had that rainy morning with Margaret. "Need a hand?" Michael called out as he stepped from his truck. The young man's shoulders sagged with visible relief. "Oh man, thank you for stopping," the stranger said, wiping sweat from his forehead. He wore dress clothes, now wrinkled from peering under the hood. "I was starting to worry I'd be stuck out here all night. Not many people would stop these days." Michael chuckled softly. "You'd be surprised," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "I'm Michael." "James," the young man replied, shaking Michael's offered hand. "I was heading home from my sister's wedding when the temperature gauge shot up. I don't know the first thing about cars." Michael nodded and moved to examine the engine. The familiar scent of hot metal and rubber brought back countless memories of his old mechanic days. "Let's take a look here." Steam still curled from the radiator cap. Michael carefully positioned himself to avoid the heat as he conducted his inspection. "Looks like a blown radiator hose," he explained, pointing to the split rubber tube. "Pretty common problem, especially in this heat." James leaned in to look, his tie dangling precariously close to the engine. Michael gently guided him back. "Careful there, don't want to add a ruined tie to your troubles." Working with practiced efficiency, Michael retrieved his toolbox from his truck. He always kept basic repair supplies handy, another habit that hadn't changed since that pivotal day with Margaret. As he worked, he shared simple explanations about car maintenance, just as he used to do with Emma when she was learning to drive. "My dad would be ashamed of me," James admitted, watching Michael work. "He always said I should learn basic car repairs, but I was too busy with computers." "Hey now," Michael said, looking up from his work. "We've all got different gifts. I couldn't write a line of code to save my life, but I'm guessing you could." When James nodded, Michael continued, "See? World needs all types." The repair took about 20 minutes. Michael used a spare length of hose he kept in his emergency kit, securing it with fresh clamps. After refilling the radiator with coolant and water, he stepped back to admire his work. "That should get you home safely," Michael said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "But have your regular mechanic replace it properly, first chance you get. This is just a temporary fix." James reached for his wallet. "Please, let me pay you something. You've saved me a fortune in towing fees." Michael held up his hand, shaking his head. "No charge. Just pay it forward when you get the chance." "At least let me buy you dinner," James insisted. "There's a diner just up the road." "Thanks, but I need to get home," Michael replied, packing away his tools. "My daughter's making dinner tonight, and she worries if I'm late." James studied Michael's face for a moment. "You know, you remind me of that story from last year, the guy who helped the president's mother. Whatever happened to him?" Michael just smiled, closing his toolbox. "He's doing fine, living his life, trying to help where he can." He gestured to James's car. "Start her up, let's make sure everything's running right." The engine turned over smoothly, and the temperature gauge held steady. James beamed with relief, then suddenly narrowed his eyes. "Wait a minute. You're him, aren't you? You're Michael Turner." Michael laughed softly, heading back to his truck. "Drive safe now, and remember to check those fluid levels regularly." As he pulled away, the setting sun cast long shadows across the road. In his rearview mirror, he could see James standing by his car, shaking his head in amazement. The golden light painted the sky in familiar shades of amber and rose, but this time, Michael's heart was full of peace instead of worry. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as 3,000 graduating seniors sat in their black robes, tassels swaying with each slight movement. The sea of mortarboard stretched across the vast hall like a field of dreams fulfilled. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall Gothic windows, catching the gold trim of their graduation stoles and casting warm patterns across the polished wooden floor. Parents and family members filled the balcony seats above, their faces glowing with pride and excitement. In the front row, the university president adjusted his reading glasses and straightened his ceremonial medallion, preparing to introduce the day's commencement speaker. Michael Turner settled into a seat near the middle of the crowd, smoothing down his tie, the same blue one Emma had given him for Father's Day last year. The silk felt soft between his fingers, a tangible reminder of their journey together. His hair had more silver now, threading through the brown in distinguished streaks, and gentle wrinkles marked the corners of his eyes like laugh lines earned through years of both struggle and joy. But those eyes still held that same quiet kindness that had changed so many lives 8 years ago. He could hardly believe how much had transformed since that rainy morning when everything fell apart and somehow came together. Around him, the crowd settled into expectant silence. The massive pipe organ fell quiet, its final notes echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Somewhere in the balcony, a baby cooed softly, and Michael smiled, remembering when Emma had been that small, full of endless possibility. Ladies and gentlemen, the university president's voice boomed through the speakers, rich with ceremonial gravity. Our student speaker today graduated summa cum laude with a double major in social work and nonprofit management. She completed her thesis on community-based solutions to poverty, which has already been cited by 3 major policy institutes. He paused, looking out over the crowd. More importantly, she embodies the spirit of service that defines our institution. Her leadership in campus volunteer programs and her work with at-risk youth demonstrate the kind of engaged citizenship we hope to foster in all our graduates. Please welcome Emma Turner. The crowd erupted in applause as Emma strode confidently to the podium, her heels clicking against the wooden stage. She looked so much like her mother now, the same warm smile that could light up a room, the same grace in her movements that made people stop and pay attention. Her graduation cap was decorated with the words, "Do what's right, not what's easy," in silver glitter, the phrase carefully lettered in her own handwriting. The mortarboard caught the light as she walked, making the words shimmer like a promise. Michael's breath caught in his throat. Sarah would have been so proud. He could almost feel his late wife's presence beside him, her hand slipping into his as they watched their daughter take her place at the podium. "Thank you," Emma began, her voice clear and strong, carrying easily through the sound system. She gripped the podium's edges for just a moment, steadying herself, then released them and stood tall. 8 years ago, my father lost his job because he stopped to help a stranger change a tire. She paused, letting the words settle over the crowd like stones dropped into still water. That morning, he had a choice between keeping his job and helping someone in need. He chose kindness. That choice cost him everything, or so we thought at the time. In the audience, Michael felt tears gathering in his eyes as memories washed over him. The rain drumming against his windshield, Margaret's gentle smile beneath her silver hair, the weight of uncertainty that had pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. He remembered the taste of panic in his mouth when his supervisor's words sank in, the long drive home rehearsing how he'd tell Emma they might lose their apartment. That stranger turned out to be Margaret Ellis, the president's mother, Emma continued, her voice growing warmer as she spoke about the woman who had become like a grandmother to them both. But here's what matters. My dad didn't know who she was when he stopped. He just saw someone who needed help. Her voice grew softer, more intimate, as if she were speaking directly to each person in the audience. That's who my father is. That's who he's always been. When I was growing up, I watched him give his last $20 to a homeless veteran. I saw him work double shifts so I could go on a school trip, then pretend he wasn't tired. He taught me that character isn't something you put on for special occasions. It's who you are when no one important is watching. The projector screen behind her lit up with images that made the audience murmur with recognition and emotion. A single mother receiving keys to her first apartment through Emma's hope, tears streaming down her face as her young son clutched her leg. A father and daughter at a job training session, both bent over a computer screen with intense concentration. A community garden built by foundation volunteers, where children played between rows of vegetables while their parents learned new skills. What started as one act of kindness grew into something bigger than any of us imagined, Emma said, gesturing to the screen with obvious pride. Emma's Hope has now helped over 2,000 single-parent families find stable employment. We've provided emergency assistance to hundreds more. We've built 3 community centers, funded 6 scholarship programs, and created partnerships with 50 local businesses. She paused, her voice catching slightly. Every face you see here represents a story of hope, of second chances, of lives transformed. Michael watched as photos continued to scroll across the screen, each one a memory that warmed his heart. The soup kitchen, where he still volunteered every weekend, ladling out meals and listening to stories. The mentorship program he'd started for single fathers, where men shared their struggles and victories over coffee and courage. The annual Christmas toy drive that brought joy to countless children, their faces bright with wonder as they unwrapped donated gifts. Behind each image was a story he knew by heart, There was Rosa, the nursing student who'd been evicted with her 3 children, now working at the county hospital. There was James, the laid-off factory worker who'd learned computer repair through their program and now ran his own business. There was little Marcus, who'd received a bike through their Christmas drive and had sent them a crayon drawing every month since then. But this isn't just about numbers or achievements, Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. It's about what happens when one person decides that kindness matters more than convenience. When someone chooses to stop, to help, to care, even when it costs them something. She turned slightly, finding her father's face in the crowd. Their eyes met across the vast auditorium, and Michael saw in her the same determination that had driven him that rainy morning, but now tempered with wisdom and strengthened by experience. My father taught me that the most important moments in life often come disguised as inconveniences, she continued, her gaze still locked on his. That true character isn't measured by what we do when it's easy, but by what we do when it's hard. When helping someone might make us late, when doing the right thing might cost us our job, when standing up for what's right means standing alone. The screen showed a recent photo of Michael helping another stranded motorist, one of many he'd assisted over the years. This one showed him in his work clothes, his hair damp with rain, his face focused as he tightened lug nuts on a tire. Some habits of the heart never changed, some lessons never faded. Margaret Ellis became more than just the woman my father helped that day, Emma said, her voice growing tender. She became family. She taught me to play piano, badly. She helped me with my college applications. She listened to me cry over boys who didn't deserve my tears. A ripple of gentle laughter moved through the audience. Before she passed away, she told me something I'll never forget. Emma's voice softened to almost a whisper, forcing the entire auditorium to lean forward. She said, "Your father didn't just change a tire that morning. He changed what people believe is possible." Heads nodded throughout the audience. Several people wiped away tears with tissues or sleeves, no longer caring who saw their emotion. In the balcony, someone whispered, "Amen." To my fellow graduates, Emma said, straightening her shoulders and addressing her classmates directly. As we leave these halls today, we'll face our own moments of choice. Moments when doing the right thing might cost us something, when kindness might seem inconvenient, when helping others might mean taking a risk. Her voice grew stronger with each word. We'll be tired from long days at work. We'll have bills to pay and deadlines to meet. We'll have every excuse to walk past someone who needs help. Emma gripped the podium again, leaning forward slightly as her voice filled with passionate conviction. In those moments, I hope you'll remember that the biggest changes often start with the smallest choices. That one act of compassion can ripple out in ways we never imagined. That sometimes, when you think you're just helping one person, you're really helping yourself find who you're meant to be. Michael felt his chest swell with pride as he watched his daughter, no longer the worried teenager from that difficult time, but a strong young woman who had helped him build something beautiful from their struggles. She stood at that podium like she belonged there, like she'd been born to inspire others. He thought of all the nights she'd stayed up late, working on foundation projects between her studies, all the weekends she'd spent at community events, talking to families who needed hope. The screen showed one final image, Michael and Emma standing together at the reopening of Emma's Hope after their vindication, their smiles bright with hard-won joy. Behind them, a banner reading "Rebuilt with Love" fluttered in the breeze, and dozens of families they'd helped surrounded them, clapping and cheering. My father lost his job that morning, Emma said, her voice now carrying the full weight of their story. But he found his purpose. Our family lost our security, but we found a community. We lost our savings, but we gained something money can't buy. The knowledge that we can face anything together. She paused, looking out over the sea of graduates. What looked like an ending turned out to be just the beginning. The audience rose to their feet as one person, applause thundering through the auditorium like a standing wave. The sound echoed off the walls and ceiling, filling every corner of the space with appreciation and love. Michael stood with them, tears flowing freely now, his hands stinging from clapping so hard. Around him, strangers nodded at him with recognition and respect, and he felt the warmth of a community that had embraced him long ago. As the standing ovation continued, growing rather than fading, he whispered the words that had become his quiet prayer. Sometimes, when you stop for someone else, you find your own way home. On stage, Emma raised her hand to quiet the crowd, but they continued clapping. She smiled through her own tears, mouthing "thank you" over and over. When the applause finally began to fade, she spoke one last time. "Thank you all. And remember, the world is full of people with flat tires. I hope you'll always be the kind of person who stops." What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Michael Turner, pick the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.